Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. When I first moved into the house, I thought I had gotten a good deal. It was one of those old rentals tucked back off a quiet street. Nothing fancy, just a small two-story place with a creaky porch and paint that had probably not seen a fresh coat in decades. The rent was cheap enough that I could cover it on my own without killing myself working overtime, and the landlord seemed friendly, if a little brisk. He handed me the keys, rattled off a list of quirks about the plumbing and the wiring, then paused when he mentioned the basement. "That stays locked," he said flatly, handing me a set of keys that were clearly incomplete. "For your own safety. Old stairs, rotten boards, could give way under you. No reason to go down there anyway." At the time, I did not think much of it. A lot of old houses have sketchy basements. I figured it was storage he did not want tenants messing with, or maybe it was just full of junk. I nodded, agreed, and moved on. The first week was uneventful. I worked, came home, unpacked boxes at a lazy pace, and tried to get used to the sounds of an older house. The walls creaked at night, pipes clanked whenever the heat kicked in, and the wind slipped through the cracks around the windows. It was nothing unusual. But by the second week, I started noticing something that did not fit into the category of just an old house. It was the vents. At first I thought maybe one of them was loose, rattling in the ducts whenever the heat clicked on. But the more I listened, the more certain I became that it was not metal or pipes. It was softer, higher pitched. The closest way I can describe it is the sound of a child laughing, muffled, like it was drifting up through the metal grates. The first time it happened, I was in bed reading. I froze, listening hard, and told myself I had imagined it, a dreamlike half sound that slipped in while I was tired. But then it came again, quick and light, like a giggle someone was trying to stifle. I got out of bed, checked the house, even stepped outside for a minute to see if maybe some neighbor's kid was out late. But the street was empty, the night was quiet. I told myself it was nothing and went back to bed, though sleep did not come easy. The next night, it happened again. This time I heard it while brushing my teeth, the sound rising up from the vent in the bathroom floor. A giggle, short and distinct. I stood there with the toothbrush hanging from my mouth, staring at the grate, the hairs on my arms prickling. I kicked it lightly with my foot, half expecting something to scurry away like a mouse, but there was nothing. It became a pattern after that. Some nights I would hear it faintly, other nights not at all. It was always soft, always quick, never long enough for me to really catch it clearly. But I started to dread it, lying awake in bed waiting, straining my ears for that faint, distant sound. Then came the toys. It was a Saturday afternoon when I first saw one. I was walking past the basement door, which sat tucked in the back hallway near the kitchen, when something small rolled out from under the crack at the bottom. I stopped, confused, and bent down. It was a little red ball, the kind you would expect to see in a preschool toy box. Faded rubber, scuffed like it had been played with for years. I picked it up slowly, turning it over in my hand. I did not own any toys. I lived alone. I had no nieces or nephews, no friends who had visited with kids. There was no reason for that ball to be there. I pushed the ball back toward the door, half expecting it to bounce against the wood and roll back, but it disappeared under the crack, like someone on the other side had reached for it. My mouth went dry. I backed away from the door and did not touch it again. That night, I did not sleep at all. Every creak, every faint sound in the vents set me on edge. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the giggle again, this time longer, like whoever it was found something particularly funny. It rose up through the vent near the kitchen, and I sat there on the couch, staring at the basement door, too terrified to move. I thought about calling the landlord, but what would I say? I think there's a child in your locked basement, even though you said it was unsafe. He would laugh me off or accuse me of snooping where I was not supposed to. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling in some strange way, or maybe kids from down the street sneaking into the yard. But deep down, I knew better. A few days later, it happened again. This time it was not the ball. It was a little plastic car, bright yellow, that slid out from under the door as if nudged by a hand. I stared at it for a long time, my skin crawling, before I picked it up and dropped it into the trash. But the next morning, it was back on the kitchen counter. That was when I knew I had to look. I spent the entire day trying to talk myself out of it, telling myself it was a terrible idea, that the landlord had been clear, that the stairs were dangerous. But curiosity mixed with fear can be stronger than reason. That evening, I found myself kneeling in front of the basement door, running my fingers over the lock. It was not much, just an old rusted padlock holding the latch shut. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, a sound drifted up. Not laughter this time. Humming. A child humming. My hands shook as I pulled back. I told myself I would buy bolt cutters in the morning. I told myself I needed to see, because whatever was down there, it was not just pipes and old boards. And if I did not find out, I knew it was only going to get worse. The next day, I went to the hardware store. I told myself it was for peace of mind, that I needed to know what was behind that door, or I would never be able to sleep again. My hands shook as I picked up a set of bolt cutters, the kind heavy enough to snap through steel without much effort. The clerk made some offhand joke about me planning a break-in, and I laughed nervously, but the sound that came out of my mouth was strained, not natural. I could feel eyes on me as I carried the tool back to the car, like everyone in the store could tell I was planning something I should not. I did not go straight home. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, sweating in the stale air of the car, telling myself I was being stupid. Maybe it really was just junk in that basement. Maybe the landlord had old boxes, or the place was structurally unsound like he claimed. Maybe I was letting late-night creaks and drafts in my imagination run wild. But then I thought about the little red ball. I thought about the yellow car. I thought about the faint giggle that had risen up through the bathroom vent and how my skin had crawled at the sound. I drove home slowly, heart pounding harder the closer I got to the house. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my palms were slick with sweat, and I had to sit there for several minutes before I could even get out of the car. My dog, who I had left in the backyard because he had started refusing to come inside, barked once as I unlocked the back door. It sounded less like a greeting and more like a warning. I carried the bolt cutters down the narrow hallway toward the basement door. My footsteps echoed too loud in the silence. The air felt heavier near that door, the kind of thick stillness that presses against your chest. I stopped in front of it and just stood there, staring at the padlock, listening. At first, nothing. Then, faint and high, like a radio signal just out of range, came the sound, giggling. I dropped the bolt cutters. The clang against the old floorboards made me flinch. The giggling stopped immediately, cut off so abruptly it made my stomach lurch. My breath came fast, shallow, as I bent to pick up the cutters again. My hand hesitated, hovering above the lock. Do it now or you never will, I thought. The cutters bit through the rusted metal with a loud snap. The sound seemed to echo through the entire house. I froze, listening, but the silence that followed was complete. No giggle, no humming, no scuff of little feet. I pushed the door open an inch. The smell hit me first, damp, moldy air, thick with dust. I gagged, pulling my shirt up over my nose, and forced the door open wider. A set of narrow wooden stairs led down into darkness. I flicked the light switch just inside the door, but nothing happened. Either the bulb was burned out or the basement had no working electricity at all. I shone my phone flashlight down instead. The beam cut across stone walls, low beams, and a dirt floor scattered with debris. And then I saw them. Toys. Not modern ones. Old wooden blocks, a worn stuffed rabbit, a rusted metal car. They were scattered across the floor like someone had been playing and left in a hurry. My pulse hammered in my ears. I told myself they could have been left there decades ago. But then I noticed something that turned my stomach to ice. Drawings. Every wall I could see was covered in them. Crayon drawings, messy and uneven, like a child's hand had scrawled them. Most were stick figures standing on a staircase. Some had a tall shape at the top of the stairs, looming over a smaller figure at the bottom. In every drawing, the small figure looked trapped, while the tall figure never moved. I stumbled backward up the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hand slipped on the railing as I scrambled out, slamming the basement door behind me so hard it rattled in its frame. My chest heaved, my throat raw, every hair on my body standing on end. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those drawings, the uneven lines, the stick figure at the top of the stairs, the way it was always just standing there, watching. My dog refused to come into the house at all, whining and scratching at the back door whenever I tried. Eventually, I gave up and slept in the living room with the windows open so I could hear him if he barked. And then morning came, and something worse than the drawings was waiting for me. I shuffled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, reaching for the coffee pot. That was when I saw it. A piece of paper on the kitchen table, white printer paper, folded once down the middle. My stomach sank as I unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a crayon drawing. Me, standing at the top of the basement stairs. The crayon lines were rough but clear. My hair, my posture, even the small details, like the creak in the floorboard where I always leaned. I dropped the paper like it had burned me and staggered back, knocking the chair over in my panic. My eyes darted to the basement door. It was still closed, the broken lock hanging loose, but I could not shake the feeling that something had come up during the night. Something had been here. I grabbed the paper off the table and crumpled it, throwing it into the trash. My hands would not stop shaking. I poured myself coffee just to have something to do, but it sloshed over the rim of the mug, dark liquid dripping onto the counter. The rest of the day I spent pacing the house, checking the doors and windows, trying to convince myself it was a prank, that maybe someone had broken in and left the drawing, but nothing else was touched. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, just the drawing, sitting there on the table like a gift. That night, I did not even try to sleep inside. I dragged a blanket out to the back porch and lay there with my dog curled against me, staring at the basement windows that jutted up just above the ground. I could not see anything in the dark glass, but I felt it, watching, waiting, and as the night dragged on, I thought I heard it again, faint, soft, a giggle rising up through the vents. This time, though, it did not stop. I woke up on the porch with a stiff neck and the faint feeling that someone had been watching me the entire night. My dog was curled against me, head tucked under my arm, but even he did not look like he had really slept. His eyes were half open, his ears twitching at every sound. The sun was just starting to rise, bleeding pale light across the yard. For a few brief seconds I thought maybe I had survived the worst of it, that maybe whatever lived in the basement stayed down there. Then I went inside. The kitchen table was covered in drawings. Not one or two this time. At least a dozen sheets of paper were spread across the wood, overlapping like a deck of cards scattered by a careless hand. Crayon drawings. Childlike, uneven lines, and every single one of them was of me. In one, I was standing at the stove. In another, I was brushing my teeth. In another, I was lying on the couch, the blanket pulled up to my chin. Each scene was real, something I had actually done in the past day. The colors were wrong, the proportions were strange, but the actions were unmistakable. My stomach dropped. I grabbed a few of the drawings and flipped them over, looking for any kind of explanation, but the backs were blank. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped one. It fluttered to the floor face up. That one was the worst of all. It showed me standing at the back door. Behind me, a smaller figure crouched low, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. No features, just a round shape with two empty circles for eyes. I snatched the drawing off the floor and shoved it with the others into the trash. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might throw up. My dog stood in the doorway, hackles raised, a low growl in his throat. He was staring at the basement door, his body trembling. I did not go near that door for the rest of the day. I locked myself in the living room with my phone, debating who I could call. The landlord, the police, a priest. Every option felt ridiculous. What would I even say? Hi, I think a ghost child is sneaking upstairs from the locked basement you swore was unsafe. They would laugh me off, or worse, think I had lost my mind. By evening, I was desperate enough to text my friend Mark. I typed something vague, like, "Weird stuff happening at my new place. Can you come stay the night?" He agreed without asking questions. I nearly cried from relief. Mark showed up around 9 with a six-pack and a confused grin. I did not tell him everything. I just said the house was old and creepy and I had been hearing things at night. He teased me a little, called me paranoid, but when he saw the tension in my face, he backed off. We sat up in the living room with the TV on, trying to pretend everything was normal. It was almost midnight when it started again. The vents rattled, faint at first, then more distinct. A giggle, a soft, high-pitched giggle drifting up through the floor. I froze, beer halfway to my mouth. Mark frowned and muted the TV. We both listened. The sound came again, louder this time, unmistakable. "Is there a kid outside?" he asked, but his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. "It comes from the basement." Mark laughed nervously, like he thought I was joking, but the look on my face must have convinced him otherwise. He stood, walked to the basement door, and pressed his ear against it. I wanted to stop him, but the words stuck in my throat. After a few seconds, he pulled back. His face was pale. "There's something down there," he whispered. Before I could respond, something rolled out from under the door. A small wooden block, red paint chipped and worn. Mark jumped back like he had been burned. My dog went berserk, barking and lunging at the door, his teeth snapping at the air. We stood frozen, watching, as another block slid out. Then another, a slow, deliberate push, one after the other, until half a dozen lay scattered across the floor. Mark grabbed my arm. "We need to leave." I nodded, but my legs would not move. My eyes were locked on the basement door. The blocks lay still now, the silence heavier than ever. I could feel something on the other side, waiting. We spent the night in Mark's car. Neither of us spoke much. My dog curled in the back seat, trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those drawings on the table. Me, going about my day, unaware of the eyes watching me. When morning came, we went back inside together. The drawings were gone from the trash. The table was clean. The blocks had vanished too. The basement door stood closed, the broken padlock still dangling from the latch. Mark looked at me like he wanted to ask questions, but he did not. He just said, "You should get out of here," and left. I wanted to take his advice. I wanted to pack my things and run, but something in me needed answers. I could not just leave, not when I knew something was down there. Something that giggled and drew and rolled toys out like it wanted to play. Something that knew me well enough to leave drawings of me asleep. That night, I set up my phone to record video, propping it on the counter facing the basement door. I sat in the living room with my dog, heart pounding, waiting. Around 2 in the morning, the giggling started again. My dog growled, low and steady, fur bristling. I forced myself to stay put, gripping his collar, whispering to him even though my own voice shook. The giggling grew louder. Something scraped against the inside of the basement door, then silence. When I checked the phone in the morning, the battery was dead. The last frame before it cut off showed the basement door cracked open an inch. I swear I had locked it. I barely touched the doorknob that morning. just brushed it with my fingertips to convince myself it was really closed, that the frame was still solid. But I could not stop staring at the gap along the floor, the thin line of darkness that looked wider than it had the day before. My dog stood stiff beside me, ears flat, a low growl thrumming in his chest like a motor that never turned off. I made coffee, but my hands shook so badly I spilled half the grounds onto the counter. The whole time, I kept glancing back toward the hallway. The door looked ordinary in the light of day, but I knew better. I had seen the toys roll out. I had heard the giggles seep through the vents. And now the memory of that recording burned in my head, the frame showing the door cracked open, even though I had sworn it was locked. I told myself I was done avoiding it. Whatever lived down there, whatever drew those pictures of me and pushed toys into my house, I had to face it. I thought about calling Mark again, begging him to come back, but I knew he would refuse. He had seen enough the other night to decide he wanted no part of this. That left me alone, me and the dog, staring at a door I could not ignore. It took me until late afternoon to work up the courage. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the yard, when I grabbed a flashlight, clipped my dog's leash to his collar, and stood in front of the basement door. The broken padlock still dangled uselessly. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The hinges creaked, the sound shrill in the silence. The smell hit me again, damp and heavy, like dirt and mold and something sweeter underneath, almost like rotting fruit. My dog whined, pulled back hard on the leash, but I tugged him forward. I could not do this alone. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended. My flashlight beam jumped across the stone walls, illuminating scattered toys, dust motes dancing in the air, cobwebs clinging to beams. My heart thudded in my ears. I felt the dog press against my leg, his nails clicking nervously on the wood. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned slowly, sweeping the light across the walls. That was when I saw the drawings again. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Every surface was covered, the lines overlapping, some fresher than others, the colors more vibrant where the wax had not yet faded. Figures at the top of the stairs, always the same, a tall shape looming, sometimes a small figure at the bottom, sometimes two, sometimes three, but always that tall shape watching from above. I stepped closer, shining the light over the rough scrawls. My stomach lurched as I realized some of the fresher drawings were not stick figures anymore. They were more detailed, the outline of my hair, the slope of my shoulders, even the shape of my dog, drawn with clumsy but recognizable strokes of brown crayon. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. I pressed my palm against the wall for balance and felt wax crumble under my fingers. When I pulled away, a smear of red and black streaked my skin. Behind me, the dog whined sharply, pulling at the leash. He was staring at the far corner of the basement, where the darkness seemed heavier, thicker, as if the light refused to reach it. My heart hammered. I raised the flashlight slowly, the beam cutting across the dirt floor. And then I saw it. Not a person, not a body, just more drawings, scrawled in frantic layers. But these were not on the wall. They were on the floor. Sheets of paper spread in a rough circle, each one covered in the same crude lines. Every single one showed me. Standing in the kitchen, sitting on the couch, sleeping in bed. My throat went dry as I recognized the details. These were the same poses from the drawings that had appeared on my table, but these were not copies. These were originals, the crayon wax still fresh, smudged by small hands. My knees went weak. I stumbled back, nearly tripping on a wooden block. The dog barked once, a sharp, desperate sound, then lunged for the stairs, dragging me with him. I let him pull me, stumbling up the steps, slamming the door behind us when we reached the hallway. My chest heaved, my whole body shaking so hard I could not catch my breath. I pressed my back against the door, gripping the leash like a lifeline. My dog whined, pawing at me, eyes wide and glassy. I whispered to him, trying to calm him. though my own voice cracked and shook. For hours after, I sat on the kitchen floor staring at the door, waiting for something to push back from the other side. Nothing did. The silence stretched on, heavier than before, pressing against me until I felt like I might choke. When exhaustion finally won, I dragged myself to the couch and collapsed. My dreams were restless, filled with muffled laughter and crayon lines scratching across paper. When I woke in the morning, the kitchen table was no longer empty. One sheet of paper lay in the center, white, crisp, edges clean, a single drawing in red crayon. It was me, standing at the top of the basement stairs, and at the bottom, for the first time, there was a face on the smaller figure, a round head, wide eyes, and a grin that stretched too far across the page. I dropped the drawing and stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My dog barked furiously, claws scraping at the floor. The paper fluttered off the table and landed face up at my feet, that wide grin staring up at me. I wanted to run, to pack my bags and never look back, but I knew it was too late. Whatever lived in that basement knew me now. It had watched me, drawn me, followed me into every corner of the house, and it wanted me to know it was not staying in the basement anymore. The drawing with the grin stayed on the floor where I dropped it. I could not bring myself to touch it again. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I gave it a wide berth, like it might bite me if I got too close. My dog avoided it too, growling low whenever he passed by. For hours I paced the house, too wired to sit still, too terrified to leave. I could not stop thinking about those walls downstairs, the way every surface had been covered with crayon lines, as if a child had spent years scribbling their days away in the dark. And now, it was not just confined drawings anymore. It was me. It was my life, mapped out in wax and paper. By afternoon, I tried to convince myself it was some kind of prank. I pulled out the trash can and rifled through the bag where I had stuffed the earlier drawings. They were gone, every last one. The crumpled papers, the smeared crayons, vanished. The only thing left was that single sheet on the kitchen floor, the grin glaring up at me. My stomach turned. That night I did not even attempt to sleep in my bedroom. I dragged the couch cushions into the living room and pushed them up against the front door. My dog curled beside me, tense and silent, his ears twitching at every sound. The house seemed to breathe around us, each creak and groan magnified in the dark. I kept the flashlight in my lap, turning it on every few minutes to sweep across the walls, terrified I would see another drawing waiting for me. Around 2 a.m, I heard it, the faint scrape of paper against wood. I sat bolt upright, the flashlight beam shaking wildly in my hands. The sound came again, from the kitchen. Like someone sliding a sheet of paper across the table, my dog growled, a deep rumble that vibrated against my side. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling, and crept toward the kitchen. The table was covered again. Not 1 or 2 drawings this time, but dozens. They were spread across the surface in neat rows, each one showing the same thing, me, asleep on the couch, the flashlight in my lap, the dog at my feet. It was not some imagined version. It was exactly how I had looked seconds earlier. I staggered back, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. My throat went dry, my skin prickled. The dog barked, sharp and desperate, lunging toward the basement door. His claws scraped at the wood as he snarled, teeth bared. I spun the flashlight that way just in time to see the doorknob turn, slowly, deliberately. I froze. My lungs seized. The knob clicked back into place without opening. Silence. Then, a soft sound seeped through the door, a giggle. High, childlike, but stretched too thin, too long, like someone trying to imitate what laughter should sound like. I ran. I grabbed the dog's leash, yanked him away from the door, and bolted outside barefoot, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The cold air slapped me in the face, but I barely noticed. I stumbled to the end of the driveway and stood there shaking, the leash wrapped tight around my fist as my dog pulled anxiously at the end. I could not bring myself to go back inside until the sun came up. When I did, the drawings were gone again. The table wiped clean. Only one remained. It sat dead center on the wood, waiting for me. This time, the drawing showed me standing outside in the driveway, barefoot, clutching the leash. The detail was uncanny, right down to the wrinkles in my shirt. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. Whatever was in that basement had followed me outside. It had been close enough to see me clearly. That day I started searching for answers. I called the landlord first. He was curt, almost angry, when I mentioned the basement. "I told you not to go down there." He snapped, his voice sharp through the phone. "That part of the house is not for tenants. Stay out of it. That is all you need to know." When I pressed him, when I demanded to know if any children had ever lived there, he hung up on me. I spent the next few hours online, searching records, old news clippings, anything I could find about the property. There was almost nothing. No history, no mention of children, just vague notes about the house changing owners a few times over the decades. It was like the place had been scrubbed clean. By evening I felt raw, my nerves shredded. I could not concentrate. Every shadow looked too deep, every corner too dark. My dog refused to leave my side, glued to me like he knew I was seconds away from falling apart. That night I taped the basement door shut with duct tape, layer after layer crisscrossed over the frame. It was pathetic. I knew it would not hold anything, but it gave me the illusion of safety. I collapsed on the couch again, exhaustion pulling at me. I woke hours later to the sound of tearing. My stomach dropped. The dog whimpered low, ears flat, as we both stared toward the hallway. The tape was peeling away from the door, curling and ripping like invisible fingers were prying it loose. One strip fell to the floor, then another. The silence in the house was suffocating, broken only by the slow rip of tape being pulled free. I could not move. I sat frozen on the couch, the flashlight clutched in a white-knuckled grip, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it could hear me. Finally, the sound stopped. I waited, chest tight, breath shallow. The dog barked once, sharp, then went silent, trembling against me. In the morning, I forced myself to check. The tape was gone, every strip peeled neatly away. At first I thought the door was closed, untouched. Then I saw it the tiniest sliver of space between the door and the frame. The door was open, just a crack. On the floor beneath it, pushed halfway into the hallway, lay another drawing. I bent slowly to pick it up, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it. It was me again, standing at the top of the basement stairs, but this time the smaller figure was not at the bottom. It was halfway up, 1 foot on the next step, the grin wider than ever. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The air felt heavy, pressing against me like a weight. I realized in that moment that it was not just trying to watch me anymore. It was coming closer. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, I knew there was nothing keeping it down there now. I hardly remember the hours after finding that last drawing. My brain felt scrambled, my chest tight, my throat raw like I had been screaming even though I had not made a sound. I sat on the floor for what must have been half the day, staring at the thin crack in the basement door, waiting for it to push open. The drawing lay on the ground beside me, the grin wide and jagged, the small figure halfway up the stairs. I could not bring myself to touch it again. At some point I forced myself to pack a bag, just a few clothes, my wallet, and my dog's leash. My hands shook so badly that I dropped half the things I tried to shove into the bag. The dog barked once, sharp and panicked, as if he knew I was planning to run. That was the hardest part. I knew he sensed every shift in the air, every sound I pretended not to hear. He had been my only anchor through this whole nightmare. I could not stay in that house another night. The moment I stepped outside with the bag, though, I froze. Sitting on the porch, neat as could be, was another drawing. No envelope, no note, just paper weighed down by a small wooden block. The block was red, the paint chipped and faded, and I swear I had seen it roll from under the basement door that first night. The drawing showed me standing outside with the bag in my hand, my dog at my side. It was not just a scene, it was that exact moment. I dropped the bag and bolted for the car, dragging the dog behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely see straight. The car stank of mildew when I slid inside, like something had been sitting there waiting. I cranked the engine and tore out of the driveway, tires skidding on gravel. My hands were slick on the wheel, my throat tight. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I could not. I was too afraid of what I might see. I drove for hours, no real destination in mind. The dog whined in the back seat, restless but calmer than he had been in days. I pulled into a cheap roadside motel and paid in cash. The room smelled of smoke and bleach, but I locked the door, dragged a chair under the knob, and collapsed onto the bed with the dog curled against my legs. For the first time in weeks, I slept. The morning light felt almost holy when it streamed through the threadbare curtains. I showered, ate a stale muffin from the vending machine, and for a few hours I almost convinced myself I had outrun it, that I had left whatever haunted that house behind me. Then I noticed the crayon marks on the motel nightstand. They were faint, almost like someone had scrawled in a hurry, but the waxy texture was unmistakable. Red lines, a circle for a head, 2 wide eyes, a grin stretched too far. My chest caved in, my stomach turned to ice. I pulled the dog close, trembling, trying to breathe. My mind raced with questions I could not answer. How had it followed me? Had it ever been trapped in that basement at all? Or had the basement just been where I first noticed it? I left the motel the same day, kept driving, kept moving. I called the landlord once more, desperate for some kind of truth. He answered, but when I demanded to know who had lived there, if any children had died in that house, his voice dropped low. "There were never any children," he said flatly, and then he hung up. That was a week ago. I have been staying with friends since then, bouncing from place to place, never in one spot long enough to notice if drawings start appearing. I do not sleep much. When I do, I wake to the faint sound of giggling, too close to dismiss, too real to ignore. The dog barks at corners sometimes. He stares at vents like something is hiding inside. I try to tell myself it is just him picking up on my nerves, but I know better. I know what I saw on those walls. I know what I heard through those vents. I know what I held in my shaking hands, paper that smelled of wax and dust, and something else I cannot describe. People keep telling me to move on, to forget, to let it go. But how do you forget the sound of a child's giggle rising up from a basement that was supposed to be locked for safety? How do you forget finding your life mapped out in crayon drawings made by hands you never saw? I do not know if it will find me again. Maybe it already has. Maybe the reason I never sleep through the night is because something is standing at the foot of the bed, watching. Maybe every time I leave a room, it is drawing me, scribbling me onto paper so it can know me better, follow me closer. I tell myself that leaving the house was enough, that it ended when I drove away. But deep down I know that is not true. I do not think it lives in the basement at all. I think it lives with me now, and no matter where I go, it will always know exactly where I am. The cottage is old, nestled in the rolling hills of rural Devon, far enough from the nearest village that the silence can be both a comfort and a kind of pressure. When I first moved here, it felt like a dream come true, a chance to live away from the noise, to breathe in fresh country air and find some peace. I knew the house had a history, but I thought it was empty except for me. The previous owners left years ago, and I haven't seen another soul around except for the occasional farmer driving past on the lane. The cottage creaks and settles in the way old houses do. You get used to the sounds of the wind in the eaves and the wood expanding and contracting. But there's one noise that I can't explain, one sound that has been following me since I moved in. It's footsteps. Not just any footsteps, but a very specific pattern. I hear them pacing upstairs, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, then repeat over and over. I'm always on the ground floor when it happens, lying in bed, trying to sleep. The stairs lead right above my head, so the sounds are loud and clear, echoing down through the floorboards. It's like someone is up there, walking back and forth with a rhythm, a deliberate pace. The pattern is consistent, as if someone is practicing a dance or pacing nervously, but I've never found anyone else in the house. At first, I thought it might be a wild animal nesting in the attic or rafters. The countryside is full of foxes, badgers, and owls that sometimes find shelter in old buildings like this. But the footsteps are too precise and regular for an animal. No animal walks 3 steps forward and 1 back in perfect sequence. Besides, I never heard scratching or other typical animal sounds. I started keeping a log noting the nights when the footsteps happened. It was almost every night, usually late around midnight, but sometimes earlier or later. The rhythm never changed. 3 steps forward, 1 back, repeated in an endless loop. The sound would last for about 5 to 10 minutes before fading away, leaving the house silent again. Sometimes when the footsteps stopped, I thought I heard a faint giggle, soft and childlike, barely audible but unmistakable. One night I set up my phone to record the sounds. I placed it on the bedside table, facing the ceiling where the stairs creak above. I stayed awake, listening intently. At around 1:30 in the morning, the footsteps began, the familiar 3 steps forward, 1 back, steady and clear. Then, just as the steps slowed and stopped, there was a soft giggle, light and airy, like a child hiding in the shadows. The recording shook me. I listened over and over, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But that giggle was real as the footsteps echoing through the old beams. I shared the clip with a friend who lives nearby, and even she got goosebumps listening to it. She asked if I was sure I was alone, if maybe someone else was living here or had been secretly sneaking around. But I knew the house better than anyone. There was no one else. The doors were locked, the windows secured. I'm certain I'm the only person here. I began searching the cottage thoroughly, trying to find any sign of another presence. I checked the attic, the crawl spaces, and the hidden corners beneath the floorboards. Everything was empty, just dust and old furniture. No footprints, no discarded belongings, nothing to suggest someone else had been here. It was as if the footsteps belonged to a ghost or some lingering memory etched into the house itself. The thought unsettled me but also fascinated me. What if the footsteps were a replay of something long gone, a spirit trapped in time, endlessly pacing in a loop of memory? The giggle felt like a connection, a hint of personality behind the sounds. It wasn't frightening exactly, but it was deeply strange, like living with a secret companion whose presence I could neither see nor touch. Sometimes when I'm lying awake listening, I try to imagine who it might have been. A child playing, a restless soul, someone who once lived in this house and left a piece of themselves behind. The cottage feels alive with stories, and the footsteps are a part of that ongoing narrative. I don't know if I will ever find out the truth about the footsteps above, but for now they are a part of my nights here, rhythmic and steady, a ghostly dance echoing through the beams and whispering of a past that still lingers. The footsteps continued night after night, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, echoing through the wooden beams above my bedroom. I tried to settle into a routine, reminding myself that old houses make all sorts of noises, that the wind rattling the windows or a branch brushing against the roof could cause creaks and knocks. But the footsteps were different. They were too measured, too consistent. The 3 steps forward, 1 step back pattern repeated again and again, never wavering in tempo or rhythm. I began keeping a notebook beside my bed, jotting down the nights and times the footsteps appeared. It was almost like clockwork, though there were occasional nights when the house was silent. Usually the pacing started just before 1 in the morning and lasted for about 10 minutes. After the footsteps ended, the quiet would stretch out, heavy and thick, only broken by that faint, soft giggle I sometimes heard, just as the sounds faded away. That giggle was the part that unsettled me the most. It wasn't a childish, playful laugh, but something lighter, almost wistful, like the sound of someone remembering something joyful, yet unreachable. It lingered in the air, barely there, but unmistakably human. It made me wonder if the footsteps belonged to a person who had once lived here, someone who was repeating a memory, trapped in a loop of the past. One afternoon, I decided to investigate the upstairs rooms more thoroughly. The cottage has a narrow staircase leading to a landing and 2 small bedrooms. Both rooms were empty when I moved in, one converted into a storage space with dusty boxes and old furniture covered in sheets. I carefully explored every inch, hoping to find some clue, maybe an old diary, a photograph, anything that might hint at who had lived here before me. In the attic, I found nothing but cobwebs and a few broken trinkets left behind long ago. No footprints, no signs of recent activity. Still, the feeling of presence was stronger there. Standing beneath the low rafters, I could almost hear the faint echo of footsteps above, pressing into the wooden floorboards. I also spoke with some neighbors, people who had lived in the area for years. They remembered the previous tenants, an elderly couple who had moved out some time ago, followed by a brief vacancy before I arrived. The couple was known locally but had no children, and no one mentioned any unusual happenings at the time. It was as if the footsteps and giggles were something older, something the neighbors had never noticed or were reluctant to speak about. Determined to get more answers, I visited the local library and archive to research the history of the cottage. The building had been here since the late 1800s, part of a cluster of small homes built for workers in the nearby mills. Over the years, many families had lived here, some for only a few years, others for decades. I found old census records, newspapers, and even photographs of the neighborhood from different eras. One record stood out, a young girl named Annie who had lived in the cottage in the early 1900s. She was described as lively and playful, often seen running through the garden and up and down the stairs. The story said she had died tragically at a young age after a sudden illness, leaving her parents devastated. Some older residents in the village remembered tales passed down about Annie, about her laughter still heard echoing in the house on quiet nights. The thought of Annie's spirit replaying footsteps and giggles sent a chill through me. It seemed to fit, the rhythmic pacing like a child running back and forth, the light giggle like a whisper from the past. Maybe the cottage held her memory so strongly that it was imprinted on the very floorboards. I began leaving small things in the upstairs rooms, toys and a few drawings I made, hoping to offer some comfort or acknowledgement. Sometimes I would find the toys slightly moved or the drawings turned over. It felt like a silent conversation, a way for Annie's presence to reach out without fear. At night, I talked softly to the footsteps and the giggle, telling the spirit I saw her and that she was welcome to stay as long as she liked. The pacing became less frequent, but no less distinct. I began to think of the footsteps as a kind of lullaby, a rhythm that connected me to the history and life of the house. Despite the eerie nature of the experience, living with the footsteps above became part of the cottage's charm. It was a reminder that the walls hold stories, that the past lingers in places we least expect. Annie's presence was a thread tying me to a long chain of lives lived in this old home. Still, I remain cautious. I never go upstairs alone at night, and I always make sure to leave a light on. The footsteps are a comfort, but also a mystery, a reminder that some stories are only partially told. I don't know what Annie wants, or if she will ever rest fully, but for now, the rhythmic dance of steps above is a presence that I have come to accept, a ghostly heartbeat of the house that keeps me company in the quiet of the night. The footsteps continued to echo above me every night. It was like clockwork, the 3 steps forward, 1 step back, the pause, then repeat. I began to feel as though the sound was less of a mystery and more of a companion, an unseen presence pacing the floorboards in time with my own breathing. But there was always that strange mix of comfort and unease. Knowing the footsteps were there made me feel connected to the history of the cottage, yet I could not shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. I found myself thinking more and more about Annie, the girl who once lived here. The record of her life was brief and filled with sadness. A lively child, taken too soon by illness, leaving behind only memories and whispers that seemed to seep into the very walls. It was heartbreaking to imagine her running up and down the stairs, the echoes of her youthful energy lingering after all these years. The rhythmic footsteps and soft giggle now made sense as remnants of her presence, perhaps repeating moments she once cherished. The idea of Annie's spirit replaying her past intrigued me. Could a memory be so strong that it imprinted itself on the house, playing on a loop like an old record? Was the cottage a kind of time capsule, holding on to fragments of the lives it had sheltered? I didn't know the answer, but I felt drawn to explore this connection further, to understand the story behind the footsteps and the giggle that haunted my nights. One afternoon I decided to clean the upstairs rooms thoroughly. The furniture was covered in dust and cobwebs, and the air smelled of aged wood and forgotten years. As I worked, I found a small box tucked away in a corner. Inside were faded photographs and yellowed letters, fragile with age. They belonged to a family who had lived here long ago. Among the photos was one of a young girl, her smile bright and eyes full of life, Annie. The letters revealed a glimpse into the family's life. They spoke of happiness and hardship, of a daughter taken too soon, and of parents struggling to come to terms with their loss. There was a tenderness in the words, a love that transcended time. Reading these, I felt closer to Annie, as if I was holding a piece of her story in my hands. That night, I sat on my bed and read aloud from one of the letters, hoping the spirit might hear. The footsteps began their familiar pattern, gentle and steady above. As I finished the letter, a soft giggle echoed down to me, warm and clear. I smiled, feeling a connection that went beyond fear or curiosity. The next day, I started leaving small gifts in the upstairs rooms, a simple doll, a bouquet of wildflowers picked from the garden, and even a handmade card with a drawing of a sunny day. These were offerings of kindness, gestures of acknowledgement for the presence I felt so strongly. Sometimes I would find the gifts slightly moved or arranged differently, subtle signs that Annie was interacting in her own way. Despite these small moments of peace, the footsteps still carried a weight. It was as if the spirit was caught between worlds, replaying fragments of a life that had ended too soon, unable to move on completely. I felt a responsibility to help, to find a way to bring closure to this restless energy. I reached out to a local historian and paranormal expert, someone who had experience with old houses and lingering spirits. She came to visit the cottage, walking through the rooms with a quiet reverence. She explained that it was common for spirits tied to strong emotions to remain, replaying moments of significance. The repetitive footsteps could be a loop of Annie's last memories, or a comforting routine she held on to. Together, we prepared a small ritual to honor Annie's memory and offer her a chance for peace. We lit candles, said words of compassion, and spoke directly to the spirit, inviting her to find rest beyond the house. As we did, the footsteps began slowly, steady but softer, as if the spirit was listening. Then the pacing gradually faded, the silence settling like a gentle sigh over the cottage. In the days after, the cottage felt lighter. The heavy presence lifted, replaced by a quiet warmth. The footsteps no longer echoed above my bed, and the giggle was heard only in my dreams. Momo seemed calmer, no longer startled by unseen noises. The house felt whole again, as if a chapter had closed. Living here now feels different. The cottage is filled with history and memory, but no longer burdened by restless echoes. Annie's story remains a part of this place, a gentle reminder of life's fragility and the ties that bind us across time. I carry her story with me, grateful for the connection and the peace we found together. The footsteps may have stopped, but the spirit of the house lives on in the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind, and the stories told in the quiet moments before sleep. And sometimes, when the night is still and the world fades away, I feel a presence beside me, warm and familiar, as if Annie's laughter still dances through the beams above. The cottage seemed to breathe with a new kind of calm after the footsteps finally stopped. Nights were quiet, the weight of unseen pacing lifted like a fog clearing from a morning field. I still felt the presence of those who had come before me in subtle ways, a faint scent of lavender or wood smoke drifting through the halls, the soft creak of floorboards where no one stood, but these signs brought comfort rather than fear. The house felt alive with memory, but it no longer pressed against me with that heavy sense of longing and unrest. Living here in rural Devon, away from the noise and rush of city life, gave me plenty of time to reflect. I thought a lot about Annie, the young girl whose life had touched this place so long ago. Her story stayed with me, haunting in its brevity, but vivid in the glimpses I'd caught through old letters and photographs. I imagined her playing in the garden, running up and down the stairs, her laughter echoing softly on summer afternoons. Knowing that a part of her had lingered here through footsteps and giggles made me feel less alone. I found myself drawn to the local village more often. The people were friendly but reserved, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's stories, but didn't always share them openly. I visited the small library and museum, asking about the history of the cottage and its former residents. The librarian pulled out dusty ledgers and photographs, helping me trace the families who had lived in the house through the decades. She told me that the cottage had always been a home for working families, mill workers, farmers, and artisans who built their lives in the surrounding countryside. The walls had witnessed births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. It was a place where joy and grief mingled, where every creak and whisper was a fragment of a larger story. I felt honored to be a part of that ongoing history. One afternoon, I came across a stack of old letters tucked away in the museum archives. They were correspondence between Annie's parents and distant relatives, filled with worries and hopes, plans for the future that were never realized. Reading them, I felt the weight of their loss and the strength of their love. The letters spoke of a family trying to hold on to each other despite the heartbreak of losing a child. It was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Back at the cottage, I continued my small rituals of remembrance. I tended the garden, planting wildflowers that Annie might have loved. I left small offerings upstairs, a doll here, a painted stone there, tokens of acknowledgement and care. I spoke to the empty rooms, telling Annie's story aloud, as if sharing it with an old friend. Sometimes, when the light caught the corner of a room just so, I thought I could see a flicker of movement, like a shadow dancing in the periphery. The nights grew longer and colder with the changing seasons. I found warmth in the simple routines: lighting the fire, brewing tea, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. The cottage felt like a sanctuary, a place where the past and present intertwined gently. The footsteps that had once echoed through the house were now part of its silent memory, a rhythm that had found its rest. Sometimes, when I lay in bed in the stillness before sleep, I imagined Annie's laughter carried on the breeze, playful and light. The giggle that had once startled me now seemed like a lullaby, a gentle song that reminded me that even in loss there is beauty. The cottage was not just a building but a keeper of stories, a guardian of souls who had called it home. I thought often about the thin veil between worlds, about how the past can reach out in unexpected ways. The footsteps above were not a haunting but a message, a reminder that love and memory endure beyond time and space. That sometimes the most profound connections are the ones we cannot see but only feel. Living here taught me to listen to the quiet, to the unseen, and to the stories whispered by old walls. The cottage became a place of healing, a space where the living and the departed shared a delicate harmony. And in that harmony, I found peace. As I write this now, the house is quiet, bathed in the soft glow of a winter afternoon. The garden outside is bare, but waiting for spring. Inside, the fire crackles gently, and Momo snoozes by the hearth, content and calm. The footsteps above are gone, but their echo remains a heartbeat in the history of this home. And sometimes, When the wind shifts just right, I swear I hear a faint giggle, carried softly through the beams, reminding me that some stories never truly end. They live on in the spaces between, in the warmth of remembered laughter, and in the footsteps that once danced above my bed. After the footsteps stopped and the house seemed to settle into a quiet peace, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened in the months since I moved in. The cottage, which once felt like just a quiet retreat, had become a place layered with memories, stories, and connections that stretched across time. Annie's presence lingered softly, like a gentle whisper in the walls, reminding me of the fragility and beauty of life. I started to understand that the cottage was more than just a home, it was a living archive of the people who had passed through, their joys and sorrows embedded in the wood and stone. I continued visiting the local village regularly, building relationships with the people who had lived here for generations. Their stories gave depth to the history I had uncovered in archives and old letters. One afternoon, an elderly woman invited me to her home to share her memories of the neighborhood. She spoke of a vibrant community, of children playing in the fields and families gathering for celebrations. She remembered Annie as a bright and curious child, full of energy and laughter. Her stories painted a picture of life that was both ordinary and extraordinary, a tapestry of moments that made the cottage feel alive. Back at the cottage, I worked on restoring parts of the garden, planting flowers and herbs that were mentioned in some of the old letters and records. It felt like a way to honor the past and create something new, a bridge between then and now. Momo seemed to enjoy the garden too, often lounging in the sun or chasing the occasional butterfly. The house was filled with life, light, and warmth, a stark contrast to the eerie nights I had first experienced. One evening, I found myself sitting in the attic room, the space where I had first felt Annie's presence most strongly. The air was cool and still, the fading light casting long shadows across the floorboards. I opened the window just a crack to let in the fresh country air and sat quietly, listening. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint sound, perhaps a giggle or the patter of footsteps, but when I looked around, there was nothing. I smiled softly, feeling the connection still there, subtle and comforting. I started writing again, inspired by the stories and memories that had unfolded around me. My journal filled with reflections on life, loss, and the invisible threads that connect us all. Writing became a way to process the experience, to keep Annie's story alive, and to explore the ways in which places hold the echoes of those who have lived there before. It was a personal journey, one that deepened my appreciation for the cottage and the history it carried. Despite the peace that had settled over the house, I sometimes found myself thinking about the unknown. What if the footsteps had been something other than a memory? What if there were still mysteries hidden in the corners of the cottage, waiting to be uncovered? The thought was both thrilling and humbling. I realized that some things are meant to remain just beyond our understanding, a reminder of the vastness of life and the many stories that weave through it. Living in the cottage also taught me about patience and presence. I learned to listen deeply, not just to sounds, but to the atmosphere, the subtle shifts in energy that hinted at stories beneath the surface. It was a practice in mindfulness, a way to honor the past while embracing the present. The footsteps above had been a catalyst for this awareness, a reminder that every place has a story, and sometimes those stories reach out to us in unexpected ways. I continued to care for the cottage with a sense of stewardship. Repairs were made carefully, respecting the original character and history of the building. I found joy in simple tasks, tending the garden, lighting the fireplace on cold evenings, and enjoying quiet mornings with a cup of tea and a book. The cottage became a sanctuary not just from the outside world but from the rush and noise of modern life. Friends who visited often commented on the warmth and charm of the place, sensing the history that filled it. I shared some of Annie's story with them, not as a ghost tale but as a story of connection and remembrance. It became a way to bring others into the circle of memory, to remind us all of the lives that shape the places we call home. As the seasons turned, the garden bloomed with new life. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and the scent of herbs filled the air. Momo chased shadows and basked in the sun, content and peaceful. The cottage, once heavy with mystery, had become a place of light and hope. One night, as I lay in bed listening to the quiet, I thought I heard that soft giggle again. It was faint and fleeting, a sound carried on the wind through the open window. I smiled and whispered a quiet thank you, feeling the presence of Annie nearby, not as a ghost or a haunting, but as a gentle spirit woven into the fabric of the cottage and the life I had built here. The footsteps above may have faded into silence, but their story lives on in the garden, in the memories shared, and in the quiet moments when the past and present meet. The cottage is a home filled with history and heart, a place where stories are remembered and love endures. And in that enduring presence, I found my own peace. The final months living in the cottage unfolded with a quiet grace that I had not expected when I first arrived. The footsteps that once echoed with eerie precision above my bed had ceased, replaced by a stillness that felt profound rather than empty. The presence that had shared my nights seemed to have moved on or found the peace it had long sought. And yet the cottage remained alive with memory, a place where past and present intertwined like the gentle tendrils of ivy climbing the old stone walls. I found a deep sense of belonging here, one that went beyond the physical shelter of the house. It was a connection to the stories etched into the very fabric of the place, to the lives that had breathed and loved and lost within these walls. Annie's story in particular became a part of my own, a reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of the spirit. In the garden, the wildflowers I planted flourished, their bright faces turning toward the sun. I often sat among them, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath my fingers, the whisper of the breeze through the leaves. It was a place of renewal, growth, and hope. I thought about Annie running through these same gardens long ago, her laughter mingling with the song of the birds. The cottage had taught me patience and presence. I learned to listen not just with my ears, but with my heart to the subtle rhythms of the world around me. The footsteps above were no longer a source of fear, but a symbol of connection, a reminder that the stories of those who came before continue to shape us in unseen ways. On clear nights, when the stars shone bright overhead, I would stand by the window and gaze out into the dark fields. The air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of earth and wood smoke. Sometimes in the quiet, I thought I heard a soft giggle carried on the wind, a gentle echo of Annie's spirit, free and at peace. I documented my experiences in a journal, hoping that someday someone else might find comfort in these words. I wrote about the footsteps, the giggle, the sense of presence, and the journey from fear to understanding. It was a story of loss and love, of mystery and healing, a testament to the enduring power of memory. The neighbors remained kind and welcoming, sharing stories and passing on small tokens of the village's history. Their warmth made the cottage feel even more like home, a place where the past was honored and the future embraced. As winter turned to spring, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The cottage was no longer just a refuge, but a place of life and light. The footsteps that once filled the nights with uncertainty had given way to silence, and in that silence, I found peace. Momo, my steadfast companion, continued to explore the garden and nap by the fire, a quiet witness to the passage of time. His calm presence was a reminder that life goes on, that joy and sorrow weave together in the fabric of existence. The house stood firm, a guardian of stories and memories. Its walls held the laughter of children, the whispers of secrets, and the steady beat of footsteps that once echoed above my bed. Those echoes were now part of the cottage's soul, a timeless dance between the seen and unseen. In the end, the story of the footsteps above was not one of fear or haunting, but of connection and remembrance. It was about a young girl named Annie, whose spirit lingered in love and light. It was about a home that held onto its history with gentle care, welcoming those who came after. And it was about me, a stranger who became part of that story, carrying forward the legacy of life and memory. The footsteps above may have faded into the past, but their rhythm continues in the heart of the cottage and in the quiet moments when the world feels full of wonder. This is where the story finds its rest, a chapter closed with grace and peace, a tale of footsteps, laughter, and the enduring bond between past and present. And as the seasons turn and the cottage stands under the wide Devon sky, I know that the stories it holds will live on, whispered softly in the breeze and carried in the hearts of those who listen. I used to think of myself as a heavy sleeper. My apartment is small, quiet, and on the second floor of an older building where the walls are thick enough that you barely hear neighbors. Nights here have always been uneventful, nothing but the occasional hum of pipes or the low whir of the fridge. That changed a few weeks ago. The first time it happened, I woke suddenly, heart pounding like I had been startled from a nightmare. But I could not remember dreaming anything at all. I lay still, listening. My eyes adjusted to the dark and drifted toward the doorway of my bedroom, which faces the hallway. That is when I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, beyond the kitchen, there was a shape, tall, too tall, its head brushed against the ceiling. The body was darker than the dark around it, like a shadow piled on top of shadow. No features I could make out, no movement, just standing there. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just the lingering fog of sleep or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It had shoulders, arms, legs. It was a figure, a person, and yet it did not look like any person I had ever seen. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to turn on the light. Slowly, I reached for the lamp on the nightstand and flicked it on. Warm yellow glow spilled across the room, into the hall. Empty. The hallway was completely empty. I sat there, breathing fast, trying to convince myself that it had been nothing more than a dream half remembered. I even got out of bed and checked the locks on the front door. Everything was secure. The hallway was bare. just as it had always been. I eventually crawled back under the blankets and told myself to sleep. But once you see something like that, you do not just forget it. The next night, I tried to shake the unease off. I went to bed later than usual, scrolling on my phone until my eyes grew heavy. I told myself that the strange vision from before was exhaustion or sleep paralysis, even though I had never experienced anything like that before. When I finally drifted off, it felt like I had only been asleep for minutes before my eyes snapped open again. I did not know why I woke up. No noise, no dream, just that same tightness in my chest. I turned my head toward the hallway. It was there again. Same place, at the far end of the hallway. But this time I did not fumble for the lamp right away. I lay there, staring, straining my eyes, hoping I was wrong, hoping it was a trick of shadow and light. But the shape was unmistakable. Too tall, too still, too heavy in the air. Finally, I reached out and snapped the lamp on. Just like before, the figure was gone. The hallway was bare. I sat awake until dawn, lights on, unable to close my eyes. My rational brain tried to offer explanations. My eyes were tired. My brain was conjuring shapes in the dark. Maybe a coat rack I had forgotten about, or some trick of light reflecting from the street outside. But the building faces a narrow alley, and I keep heavy curtains over the windows. There is no light from outside that could possibly make that shape. Still, I tried to dismiss it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that if I ignored it, it would stop. But it did not stop. The third night, I barely slept at all. I left the hallway light on, hoping the brightness would chase away whatever it was. Around 3 in the morning, my dog, who normally slept soundly at the foot of my bed, lifted his head and growled low in his throat. His ears went back. Then, all at once, he leapt from the bed and started barking furiously at the hallway. His hackles were raised, his body trembling, tail tucked so tight it almost disappeared. I looked toward the hallway and felt my stomach twist into knots. Even with the light on, it was there. The same tall, dark figure at the far end, standing motionless, watching. I flipped on every light I could, yelling at it, telling myself that whoever or whatever it was, I would scare it away. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, it was gone. Just empty space, and the faint echo of my dog's barks bouncing off the walls. That was when I knew it was not just in my head. I had seen it. My dog had seen it. Something was there. I started keeping the lights on all night after that. It felt stupid, like I was a kid afraid of the dark, but at least the brightness gave me a sense of control. I kept telling myself I was safe, that nothing could hurt me, that this was just a passing hallucination or stress. But deep down, I knew better. Because once something has been in your hallway, once you have seen it stand there, silent and waiting, you cannot shake the feeling that it is only biding its time. That was only the beginning. After that night with my dog barking at the hallway, I knew I could not dismiss it anymore. It was not exhaustion. It was not my imagination. Something was there, and now it was not only me seeing it. My dog had reacted like an animal does when it knows a predator is nearby, and that was somehow worse than anything I could have conjured in my own mind. You can talk yourself out of shadows. You cannot talk a dog out of fear. The next day, I tried to go about life like normal. I made coffee, went to work, answered emails, but everything felt hollow. I kept glancing at corners, at reflective surfaces, at anything where a shadow might form. At one point, while I was standing in line for lunch, I caught myself staring down the hallway of the office building, half expecting to see the same tall figure waiting at the end. It was not there, but the thought alone made me feel sick. When I got home that evening, the apartment felt wrong, too quiet, too expectant. My dog refused to go near the hallway. He kept pacing in circles, panting heavily, looking at me like I should understand what he was feeling. I sat on the couch with all the lights on and tried to calm us both down. Around midnight, I gave in and set up a small camera in the living room. I aimed it directly at the hallway, thinking maybe, just maybe, if I caught something on video, I could prove to myself that this was real. Or maybe I could prove to myself that it was not, which at that point I would have gladly accepted. I left the camera running and went to bed with the door cracked open so the lens had a perfect view down the hall. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke with that same crushing feeling of being watched. I glanced toward the doorway, and of course, it was there again. The figure stood perfectly still at the far end of the hall, its head tilted in a way that made my stomach knot. My mouth went dry. I reached for the lamp, hand shaking, and when the light came on, the hallway was empty, just like before. I forced myself out of bed, went straight to the living room, and grabbed the camera. My hands shook as I scrolled through the playback. Most of the footage was nothing, just still frames of an empty hallway. But then I saw it. Around the same time I had woken up, the figure appeared on the feed. It started at the very far end, so dark it almost blended into the wall. Then, frame by frame, it shifted closer, not in smooth motion. More like it flickered forward, each new position an inch nearer than the last. By the time the video ended, it was halfway down the hallway, standing directly across from the bathroom door, still, waiting. I almost threw the camera against the wall right there. Instead, I shut it off, buried it under a blanket on the couch, and sat shaking for the rest of the night. The next morning, sunlight should have felt like relief. Instead, it only revealed how ragged I had become. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a face I hardly recognized. Pale skin, dark bags under the eyes, a mouth pulled thin from too many hours of silence and fear. My dog looked just as bad, pacing the apartment restlessly, whining at nothing. That night, I could not bring myself to set up the camera again. The thought of watching it move closer was unbearable. But I still left every light in the apartment burning, as though that thin barrier of brightness would keep it at bay. I tried to sleep on the couch, telling myself I would stay awake until morning, but exhaustion dragged me under anyway. I woke again in the middle of the night. This time, the hallway lights flickered. Not off completely, just dimming and brightening, like someone was playing with the switch. And at the very edge of the light, right where the glow began to fade into shadow, I saw it. It was closer. Not at the far end anymore. A few steps forward, nearer to the kitchen. I could see the outline of its shoulders, long and sloped, the arms hanging too low, the head bent slightly as if it were ducking under the ceiling. I froze, barely breathing, afraid that any movement would draw it nearer. My dog whimpered and pressed himself against my side, his body trembling so hard I could feel the vibration through the cushions. I stayed like that until the light steadied again. When it did, the figure was gone. The following day, I could not stop replaying it in my mind. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw it standing there, closer than before. My apartment no longer felt like mine. It was as though the hallway had become a stage, and I was only an audience member forced to watch whatever came next. On the fourth night, I left the camera running again. I told myself I had to know, even if the truth made me sick. Sleep did not come easily, and when it did, it was shallow and restless. I woke up again around the same time, heart hammering, skin damp with sweat. The hallway looked empty at first, but I could feel it. That pressure in the air, that sense of something watching. My stomach rolled with dread. I stayed in bed until morning, unable to face the hallway, unable to check the footage until the sun came up. When I finally forced myself to look, the video showed exactly what I feared. The figure had moved again, closer. Step by step, night by night, it was walking toward me. By the end of the recording, it stood only a few feet from my bedroom door. I do not think I realized how much of myself I was losing until that fifth night. By then, my entire existence revolved around waiting for it to appear. I barely ate. I hardly showered. My dog had stopped sleeping altogether, pacing from one room to another with his ears flat, whining low in his throat as if warning me even when nothing was visible. Every creak of the building, every gust of air through the vents, made both of us jump. The apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. That night, I left the camera running again, though my hands shook so badly it took me several tries to set it up. I kept thinking about the last frame I had seen, where the figure stood only a few feet from my bedroom door. It had been advancing steadily, night after night. If the pattern held, it would be right outside my door this time. I do not know why I tortured myself by watching the footage the next morning. Maybe some part of me thought I could prepare for what was coming, even if that preparation meant nothing. When I hit play, the hallway appeared empty at first. The seconds ticked by, then the faint flicker of static, and there it was, the tall, dark shape, closer than before. Frame by frame, it inched forward. It no longer stayed at the far end of the hallway like it had at the beginning. It was walking, deliberate and slow, each new flicker showing it farther along. By the end of the recording, it was standing directly in front of my bedroom door. I slammed the laptop shut so hard I thought I had broken it. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow and ragged. I could not sit still. I paced the living room while my dog barked at the closed door of the bedroom, his nails scratching the wood like he was trying to dig his way through. I yelled at him to stop, but the truth was, I wanted to scratch the door down myself just to prove there was nothing behind it. Except I knew better. Later that night, I made the mistake of trying to sleep in the bedroom anyway. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe the footage was glitched. Maybe there was something wrong with the camera lens. I curled up in bed with the lamp on and the dog at my side, though neither of us found much rest. Somewhere after midnight, I woke to my dog barking furiously, louder and sharper than I had ever heard from him. He stood at the bedroom door, fur bristling, teeth bared, his body stiff as he lunged at the wood. His eyes were wild, not looking at me but at something beyond the door, something I could not see. I froze. My mouth was dry. Every muscle in my body wanted to run, but where would I go? Out into the hallway, where I already knew it was waiting. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door, on the bedroom door. I could hear the wood trembling under the weight of it, hear the hollow thud echoing in my chest. My dog lost control, scratching and snapping at the air as if the thing were inches away from pushing its way inside. I stumbled out of bed and grabbed the camera from the dresser. My hands were shaking so badly that the screen blurred, but I forced myself to check the live feed. The hallway camera showed it clearly. The tall figure stood pressed against the bedroom door, its shadowed outline looming like it was bending over me. The head tilted slightly, as though it were listening. My stomach lurched when I realized its arms were stretched out, palms flat against the door. I dropped the camera and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the dog as he lunged at the wood again. I could not bring myself to open the door. I could not even bring myself to speak. I just stood there, heart hammering, until the knocking stopped. When I finally dared to look at the camera again, the hallway was empty. That morning, I called a friend who lived across town. I did not tell him everything, just that I needed a place to crash for a while. He agreed without asking questions, probably because he heard the tremor in my voice. I packed a bag quickly, avoiding the hallway, refusing to look at the bedroom door. My dog practically dragged me to the car, whimpering until we were both inside. For a few hours at his place, I felt almost human again. The light coming through the blinds felt normal. The hum of traffic outside was reassuring. I even managed to nap on his couch while my dog finally collapsed into a restless sleep beside me. For the first time in days, I thought maybe I had outrun it. Then I made another mistake. I checked the hallway camera remotely through my phone. The feed was live, and there it was. The figure still stood at my bedroom door, even though I was miles away. It had not moved, not flickered away like before. It was just standing there, waiting, as if it knew I was still watching. My stomach dropped. My throat felt like it was closing. I shut off the feed and shoved the phone under a cushion, as if hiding it would make the image vanish from my memory. But I could still feel it. That night, I woke in my friend's apartment at the same time I always had, heart pounding, skin damp with sweat. My dog stood at the edge of the couch, growling low, staring at the hallway that led to the bedrooms. His body shook the same way it had at home. I did not check. I did not move. I lay there frozen, listening to the growl of my dog, the sound of my pulse in my ears, the emptiness pressing in from the hall. I kept telling myself I was safe, that it was miles away, still standing in my apartment, but deep down I knew better. I knew it was moving closer, whether I could see it or not. I could not stay at my friend's place more than 2 nights. He did not ask me to leave, but I could feel the weight of my fear starting to bleed into his home. He noticed the way my dog barked at empty corners, the way I jumped at every sound from the hallway. I knew he could not understand. It was not fair to bring this into his space. So I packed my things, forced a smile, thanked him, and went back to my apartment. I do not even remember the drive. My hands were cold on the wheel the whole time, my body heavy with dread. When I finally pulled into the parking lot and looked up at the building, it felt like my chest was caving in. The thought of stepping inside made my skin crawl, but I told myself it was the only way forward. Pretending I could escape was pointless. The apartment was exactly as I had left it. Lights off, curtains drawn, silent, except for the low hum of the fridge. My dog refused to cross the threshold. He planted himself in the doorway and whined, pulling against the leash when I tried to drag him inside. I let him stay in the hall, though the idea of being alone in there made my stomach twist. The first thing I did was check the camera. I told myself I needed to know if it was still there, if it had moved at all while I was gone. The feed loaded, and there it was, clear as ever. The tall figure stood in the hallway, pressed against the bedroom door. It had not moved an inch. The same outline, the same tilt of the head. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if it had been there the entire time I was away, or if it had followed me and come back. Either way, it was waiting, always waiting. I should have destroyed the camera then, but I did not. Instead, I left it running, like I needed to keep punishing myself with proof. That night, I lay on the couch with every light on, clutching a blanket, my dog curled up against me. I kept the feed open on my phone, staring at the motionless shape. Hours dragged by. Nothing happened. And then, sometime after midnight, it moved. Not much, just a single shift. One frame it was flush against the door. The next, it had turned its head slightly, as though it were looking directly at the camera. My blood turned cold. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My dog whimpered in his sleep, ears twitching like he was trapped in a nightmare. I watched as the figure began to step back, slowly, deliberately, frame by frame. It pulled away from the door and stood farther down the hallway. I thought for a second it was leaving, retreating back to where it had come from. My body flooded with relief, so sharp it almost hurt. But then I realized what it was doing. It was walking toward the living room. Toward me. Every few seconds, the feed flickered and it appeared closer. First at the midpoint of the hallway, then a few feet farther. Each time my breath hitched, my skin prickled, my throat closed tighter. My dog woke and started barking frantically, tail jammed between his legs, backing himself into the corner of the couch. He was looking past me, eyes fixed on something I could not see. By the time I forced myself to shut the feed off, the figure was only steps away from the edge of the living room. I sat there shaking, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. The apartment felt crowded, suffocating, as though something massive was filling the air around me. The hours between then and dawn blurred. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke to my dog nudging my arm with his nose, whining to be let outside. Sunlight streamed weakly through the blinds. For a few moments, I let myself believe that it was over, that maybe sunlight really did mean safety, like when I was a kid. But when I checked the camera, my stomach dropped. The last frame before the battery died showed the figure standing at the very edge of the living room, inches away from where I had been sleeping on the couch, its head tilted down, shoulders hunched forward like it was bending over me. I deleted the file immediately. I could not stand the thought of it sitting there on my phone, waiting for me to open it again. But even after it was gone, the image stayed in my mind. That towering shape leaning closer, the implication that I would not have known if it reached for me. The rest of the day was a haze. I did not eat. I did not leave the couch. My dog stayed pressed against me, shaking whenever a floorboard creaked. I tried to convince myself to leave again, but the thought of being alone in another place felt just as unbearable. At least here, I knew where it was, or at least I thought I did. That night, I swore I would not check the feed again. I swore I would keep my eyes closed, that I would not let it drag me deeper into whatever this was. But of course, when the air grew heavy and the silence pressed against my ears, I gave in. The camera showed the hallway empty. For the first time in days, no shadow, no flicker, nothing. I wanted to feel relieved. I wanted to believe it was gone. But the truth was worse. Because if it was not in the hallway, where was it? My dog started growling again, low and steady, staring not at the door this time, but at the bedroom. The hair on his back stood straight up. I did not check the feed after that. I turned off the phone, pulled the blanket over my head like I was a child, and prayed for dawn. But in the silence, I could swear I heard it. The faintest sound of floorboards creaking under a weight that was not mine. By the time the fifth night rolled around, I was a wreck. My body felt like it was running on fumes, twitching with exhaustion, but my mind would not let me close my eyes without terror clawing its way in. Everything in the apartment seemed charged with static, like the air before a storm, heavy and waiting. My dog had stopped barking as much, which was somehow worse. Instead, he sat rigid by the bedroom door, ears back, growling low in his throat for hours on end. He refused to leave that spot, as if he knew exactly where the threat lingered. I kept the lights on again. Every lamp, every overhead bulb, even the dim kitchen fixture that buzzed faintly. Still, it was not enough to chase the feeling away. Shadows clung to the corners of the room no matter how bright I made it. The place felt alive, and not in any way I wanted. I promised myself I would not check the camera, but of course, that was a lie. Around midnight, I opened the feed on my phone and stared at the grainy black and white image of the hallway. Empty. My breath caught. For a moment I thought maybe I had imagined everything after all. Then the screen flickered, and there it was. The figure stood in the middle of the hallway, closer than it had ever been. Its head brushed the ceiling, its shoulders broad and sloped, arms hanging almost to the floor. It was so close to the camera now that the grain struggled to capture it, distorting around the edges of its form. I could not see a face, just a darker mass where its head should be. I wanted to shut the feed off, to throw the phone across the room and never look again, but I could not. I watched as the frames ticked forward. Each flicker brought it closer to the camera, closer to me. My throat tightened as the last frame froze. The figure was no longer in the hallway. It was standing directly in front of the lens, blocking it completely. I dropped the phone. My dog erupted into furious barking, throwing himself against the bedroom door like he was trying to break it down. My pulse pounded in my ears so loudly I thought I would pass out. The lights flickered once, twice, before steadying again, and in that heartbeat of dimness, I swore I saw movement at the edge of the living room. I backed against the wall, clutching the blanket like it was some kind of shield. My dog scratched frantically at the wood, claws screeching, teeth gnashing. Then it came. 3 slow knocks against the bedroom door. The sound froze me in place. Each knock was deliberate, heavy, rattling the frame like something was pressing its weight against it. My dog snarled and lunged, biting at the wood, saliva flying. I tried to whisper to him, tried to calm him, but the words stuck in my throat. All I could do was stare at the door and listen. The knocking stopped. Silence fell so heavy it made my ears ring. My dog whimpered, lowering his head but keeping his eyes locked on the door. I thought maybe it was over, maybe the thing had given up, when the sound came again. Not knocking this time. Scraping. A long, dragging scrape, like fingernails clawing down the wood. The sound made my skin crawl, made my teeth ache. It was slow, steady, deliberate, working its way from the top of the door down to the bottom. The dog howled and backed away, pressing himself against my legs, trembling so hard I could feel it through my bones. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to grab him and run out the front door and never look back. But my body would not move. My feet were lead. My chest felt like it was caving in. All I could do was stand there, shaking, as the scraping continued. Then it stopped. I waited for something else, for the door to burst open, for the lights to fail, for the thing to finally reveal itself fully. But nothing came. The silence stretched on until I could barely breathe. My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall to the floor, pulling my dog into my lap. He buried his face against me, still trembling, still whimpering. We stayed like that until dawn. The morning light crept weakly through the blinds, painting the room in pale stripes. I felt no relief, only a deeper dread settling into my stomach. I forced myself to check the hallway. Empty. The door looked untouched. No marks, no scratches, no dents, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. That day, I could not bring myself to leave the apartment. I paced the rooms, checking every corner, every window, every lock. My dog followed me, never more than a few feet away, eyes always darting to the hallway. I did not eat. I barely drank water. My mind replayed the knocking, the scraping, the sound of something waiting just beyond the door. By evening, I was shaking so badly I could not hold a glass steady. I sat on the couch with my dog pressed against me, staring at the bedroom door, waiting for the sound to come again, waiting for the next nightfall. And that was the worst part, the waiting. Every minute dragged like an hour. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every shift of shadow felt like it was reaching for me. My heart never slowed, pounding in my chest as though it knew what was coming. When night finally fell, the air grew heavy again. My dog whimpered and pressed closer, his body stiff with fear. The lights flickered once more. I told myself I would not look at the camera again. I told myself I would not give it the satisfaction. But when the silence stretched too long, when the weight of being watched became unbearable, I caved. The feed loaded. The hallway was empty. For a second, I almost believed it. My chest loosened, my eyes stung with relief. But then I saw the timestamp. The feed had frozen hours earlier. It was not showing me the present. I dropped the phone and clutched my dog as the apartment groaned around us, as the lights dimmed, as the air thickened with something that was not supposed to be there. The night was not over. It was only getting closer. By the time the sixth night came, I was not myself anymore. I had not eaten a full meal in days. My skin felt clammy. My head throbbed constantly. And when I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror that afternoon, I did not even recognize my own face. Hollow eyes, lips cracked, jaw tight from clenching through the hours of silence. My dog looked just as worn down, a shadow of himself. His ribs showed more sharply than they had a week earlier. He refused food, only drank a little water when I put it in front of him. He stayed close to me at all times, tail tucked, trembling every time he glanced toward the hallway. That night I did something reckless. I turned off the camera. I could not keep watching it inch closer, frame by frame, night by night. It felt like torture. It felt like I was feeding it somehow, giving it what it wanted by acknowledging its slow crawl toward me. So I shut it off, unplugged it, and shoved it in a drawer. I told myself if I did not look, maybe I could take some of the power back. Of course, that was a lie. The silence that night was heavier than it had ever been. The air pressed against my skin like damp cloth, making it hard to breathe. Every sound in the building seemed to amplify the groan of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the faint drip of the bathroom sink. My dog whimpered and pressed against me, his body rigid. I stroked his head with a shaking hand, whispering nonsense to him, though my own voice sounded thin and unreal. At some point, I must have dozed, because I woke to the sensation of being stared at. That horrible weight of eyes on me, pressing, suffocating. My dog erupted in a frenzy of barking, teeth bared, body lunging at the empty air near the bedroom door. His hackles rose, every muscle taut with rage and terror. And then the lights went out. Not just flickered out, every bulb, every lamp, all at once. The apartment plunged into blackness so thick it felt solid. My dog barked until his voice cracked, then whimpered, clawing frantically at the couch cushions as if trying to bury himself inside them. In the dark, I heard it, floorboards groaning, one after another. Not random creaks, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving from the hallway into the living room. Closer, closer. My throat closed. I could not scream. I could not even move. I sat frozen, clutching my dog, feeling his body vibrate against mine with raw panic. The footsteps stopped directly in front of me. I do not know how long I sat there, barely breathing, skin prickling, heart hammering so loud I thought it would burst. I waited for something to happen, a hand on my shoulder, a voice in my ear, teeth sinking into flesh, anything, but nothing came. The silence stretched, deeper than ever. When the lights finally flickered back on, the room was empty. The hallway was empty. The door was closed. I stayed frozen until dawn. When sunlight crept through the blinds, I felt no relief, only emptiness. My dog lay curled against me, eyes glazed, too exhausted even to lift his head. I whispered to him, told him it was over, but even I did not believe the words. That morning I packed. Not everything, just a bag of clothes, some cash, my dog's food. I left the rest behind. I locked the door without looking back and drove until the gas tank was nearly empty. I am not in that apartment anymore. I will never go back. But here is the truth that keeps me from sleeping even now. The thing never needed the hallway. It never needed the camera. It wanted me. And once something like that has stepped into your life, into your home, into your bedroom, it does not just stop. The last night I was there, when the lights came back on, I thought I saw something just for an instant, a reflection in the black screen of my phone, lying on the floor where I had dropped it. Not me. Not my dog. Taller, darker, leaning closer than it should have been. I left. Yes, I am somewhere else now, but the hours are the same. Around 3 in the morning, I wake. My dog whimpers. The air feels thick, heavy, expectant. I lie there, staring at the door, waiting for the sound of footsteps, waiting for the scrape of nails. I tell myself it is gone, that it stayed in that place, that I outran it. But the truth is, I do not know. Sometimes, when I walk down the hallway of this new apartment, I catch myself glancing at the far end, expecting to see it standing there, tall, still, waiting, and I think one day I will. At first, I thought maybe I had just forgotten. I was tired. The day had been long, and I wasn't exactly known for being super organized. So when I came home and found all the mugs missing from the kitchen cabinet, I figured I must have packed them up at some point and just blanked on it. Or maybe I had set them somewhere weird while cleaning. That kind of thing happens, right? But then I found them in the bathroom. Not broken, not stacked in the sink, just lined up neatly along the edge of the tub, every single one of them, handle facing out, spaced evenly apart, like someone had measured the gaps between them. My favorite one, the one with the little chip near the rim, was upside down. not knocked over, placed that way. It was such a stupid thing to be unnerved by, but something about it hit me wrong. I stood there for a while, not touching anything, just staring at the arrangement. It felt intentional, like someone was trying to say something without using words. I did a full walkthrough of the house after that. Living room, fine. Bedroom, nothing out of place. Kitchen was weirdly spotless, which wasn't normal for me. I live alone and I'm not messy, but I'm not the kind of person who wipes down every surface before work. That day I had left a bowl in the sink. I was sure of it. It was gone. I checked the locks. Everything was still locked. Deadbolt was fine. Windows latched. Back door still had the security bar in place. I don't have any cameras, but I do have one of those smart sensors on the front door. It logs when the door opens and closes, even if you don't unlock it through the app. No entries while I was out. Not a single one. So either someone had a key and got in without leaving a trace, or I had finally lost it. I didn't report it. Not yet. I mean, what was I going to say? Someone broke in and moved my coffee mugs to the bathtub. That's not a crime, that's just weird. The kind of thing that gets you a polite smile and a post-it note on a file that says, "Watch for psych evil." I put the mugs back, all of them, didn't even wash them, just set them in the cabinet and told myself to let it go. The next few days were normal, too normal, like the house was holding its breath. I'd come home, half expecting something else to be off, but everything was where I left it, keys on the hook. Mail on the table, nothing out of place. Then it happened again. I came home from work and opened the fridge to grab a drink. That was when I saw it. Every shelf was full. Not with my food, not even close. There were plastic containers stacked on top of each other, all unlabeled. Bags of produce I don't eat, radishes, beets, something that looked like raw squash but felt too soft. A pack of eggs that were a brand I had never bought. Cartons of some grayish drink that had no label at all, just a white cap and a plastic seal. The drinks creeped me out the most. I threw everything away, didn't even check the expiration dates. I just opened a trash bag and dumped all of it. I wiped down the shelves, double-checked the lock on the back door, and stood in the middle of the kitchen trying to slow my breathing. Nothing stolen. Again. Nothing broken. No signs of entry, no sounds. Just a fridge full of food I didn't recognize. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation as calmly as I could. I kept my voice steady, gave the address, asked if anyone else in the neighborhood had reported anything weird. The officer I spoke with was polite, but I could hear it in his voice, that careful tone people use when they are trying not to call you crazy. He asked if I had roommates. I said no. He asked if I had given anyone a key. I said not in over a year. He asked if I had maybe forgotten about a grocery delivery. I laughed, and it sounded wrong coming out of my mouth. He told me to keep an eye on things and to call again if it escalated. That night, I found the note. It wasn't taped anywhere obvious. It was inside the mirror. Not behind it, inside it, pressed between the glass and the backing, like someone had carefully peeled back the edge, slid the paper in, and sealed it again. The note was small, white, folded once, no handwriting on the outside. Inside it said, "We live differently." No name, no explanation, Just that. I slept with the lights on that night. Not all of them, but enough. A lamp in the hallway, one in the living room. I checked the attic hatch 3 times. I don't even know what I was looking for. Just needed to know it was still sealed. I dreamed that someone was rearranging all the furniture while I slept, not moving it exactly, just nudging it, an inch here, an inch there. Just enough that I would wake up and feel like something was off but not be able to name it. The next day, I bought a camera, just one of those little motion-activated ones. I set it up in the kitchen, pointing toward the hallway and the back door. I told myself that if it happened again, at least I'd have proof. But nothing happened for a while. No new notes, no weird food, no misplaced objects. Until the humming. I woke up around 4 in the morning. I wasn't sure why at first, just that something had pulled me out of sleep. The room was quiet. My phone showed no alerts, no motion on the camera. Then I heard it. Faint, just above me. Someone humming. A low, rhythmic sound. Not a song I recognized, no melody, just that soft, steady hum. It was coming from the attic. I stood there in the dark, listening, heart pounding, the air in the room suddenly colder. And when I finally got the courage to check the hatch, I saw them. Bare footprints, leading away from where I sleep. I didn't go up there right away. The attic, I mean. I know how that sounds. You probably think I should have rushed to check it out the second I saw the footprints. But I didn't. I stood on the stepladder, hand on the hatch, and I just stared at them. Those faint, bare outlines in the dust. No shoes, no socks, just toes, heels, arches. Almost like a kid's size, but not quite. Longer. The prints were dry, no mud, no streaks. Just impressions, soft and shallow, as if whoever left them had been walking slow, careful. They led away from where my bed was, down the beam that ran above the hallway ceiling. They stopped right before the corner turned, where the ductwork would make it hard to pass. I didn't go any further. I closed the hatch, not fast, not dramatic, just slow and deliberate, like I thought slamming it would set something off. I stepped down and moved the ladder out of the way. Then I dragged the heaviest chair I had into the hallway and set it directly underneath the hatch, like that would stop anything. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the living room with the lights on, every lamp and bulb glowing, and waited for morning. I didn't check the camera footage until after sunrise. I kept thinking about what I would see. Someone crawling out of the attic in the middle of the night, walking barefoot down the hallway, standing over me while I slept. But the footage was clean. Nothing but stillness. The hallway light didn't even flicker, no movement, no sound. And yet the footprints were real. I cleaned them up around 8. I used a damp rag and wiped the dust back into place, part of me hoping it would stay untouched. That if it really was just one weird, awful moment, it would be over now. It could be over. I checked every vent, every crawl space, every closet. Even though I knew it was useless, I knew I wouldn't find anything, but I needed to feel like I was doing something. Around noon, I called my friend Kayla. She's the kind of person who knows when not to make fun of you. She picked up on the first ring, and I didn't ease into it. I just told her everything. from the mugs to the fridge to the note to the footprints. She was quiet for a while after I finished. Then she said, "Are you sure someone's not messing with you?" I told her I didn't know what I was sure of anymore. She offered to come stay the night, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I said yes. That evening, she showed up with a sleeping bag and 2 thermoses of tea. She looked around like she was expecting things to jump out at her. I guess I don't blame her. Once you tell someone there are notes hidden in your mirrors and footprints in your ceiling, they look at your house differently. We sat on the couch and tried to distract ourselves, put on a movie, ordered food, talked about dumb stuff. She asked if I had enemies. I laughed, even though it wasn't funny. I work from home. I keep to myself. I don't even really use social media anymore. My world is small by design. Nothing happened that night. No humming, no movement, no new notes. When we checked the attic hatch the next morning, it was undisturbed. Dust still clean, no new prints. She stayed one more night just to be sure. Still nothing. When she left, she gave me a look like maybe it really was just a fluke. Maybe a neighbor with a key playing some elaborate prank. Maybe a wiring issue making noises in the walls. All the usual explanations. But I saw it in her face too, that tiny doubt, that little whisper of unease that said maybe not. The next few days were quiet. But then the changes started again. Not big ones, just subtle stuff. A dish I hadn't used in a while would suddenly be wet in the drying rack. My toothbrush moved half an inch. A single sock laid flat on the hallway floor, perfectly centered like it had been placed with intention. One morning, I found a folded towel on the couch, not mine. Different texture, different color, no tag. Just sitting there like someone had come out of the shower and forgotten to bring it back. The worst one was the closet. I opened it one morning to get a hoodie, and every piece of clothing had been turned inside out, not just thrown around. Every single one, neatly reversed and hung back up. I stood there for a long time, touching the sleeves, trying to figure out how long that would even take. That was when I started hearing it again. The humming. Not every night, but sometimes, low and steady, from the attic. Never loud, never aggressive, just present, like someone passing time, waiting. I started leaving the lights on again. I moved the camera to face the hallway more directly. I even bought another one and aimed it at the attic hatch. Nothing ever showed up. Just the faint hum picked up on the audio, so soft you almost had to boost the volume to catch it. I stopped calling the police. I knew what they would say. I stopped telling friends. I knew how they would look at me. Instead, I did something I had not done in years. I went into the attic during the day. I pulled the ladder over, climbed up with a flashlight, and opened the hatch, slowly. It was mostly what you'd expect. Insulation, old boxes, some ductwork, a few plastic storage bins I had not touched since moving in. But something had changed. Someone had swept a clear path across the beams, dust brushed away, footprints overlapping, some small, some longer, like more than one person had been up there. And at the far corner, tucked between 2 beams, was a book. Not one I recognized. No title on the spine, just a faded brown cover, cracked at the edges. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. Because even from a few feet away, I could see what was written inside the front cover. It said, in neat pencil handwriting, "This house knows how to keep company." I didn't bring the book down right away. I closed the attic hatch and sat on the top step of the ladder for a long time. The light was still on in the hallway, but it felt like something had dimmed anyway. My arms felt heavy. I didn't know what to do with them. I kept picturing that handwriting, those 5 words written so calmly. This house knows how to keep company. Not welcome, not safe, not haunted, just company. I finally climbed down and put the ladder back. I didn't talk to anyone that day. I didn't go online. I didn't even eat. I just sat on the floor next to the wall outlet with my phone in my hand and the camera feed open, watching the attic hatch for hours like it might twitch. It never did. I went back up the next morning. Something about the daylight made it feel more manageable, still not good, but less unreal. I brought gloves this time, a mask too, even though the air up there was already thin and dry. I crossed the beam slowly and picked up the book. It was heavier than I expected. The cover looked handmade, not like a journal you buy from a store, but something older. The leather was cracked, but not dusty. The pages were thick and yellowing. Someone had taken time with it. Like it mattered. The handwriting was all the same, page after page of it. Neat, small, penciled in, no names, no dates, just entries, thoughts, observations. Some were only a sentence. Others stretched across the entire page. The first few didn't make sense. The chair is too close to the window now. She liked the humming more when it was softer. The fridge accepted 4 new items today. That kind of thing. I thought maybe it was a diary at first, but it didn't read like one. It read like someone was keeping track of something, as if they were recording small shifts in the house itself. Almost like you would document the weather. Some of the entries were about me. I didn't see my name, but there were notes I recognized. He checks the attic, but never for long. He does not eat radishes. He throws them away. He pretends not to notice the mirror. That one stopped me. I read it 3 times. I had not told anyone about the mirror. Not the police, not Kayla. I hadn't even written it down. And yet there it was, in handwriting I had never seen before, in a book I didn't own, in a part of my house I had not touched in years. Whoever wrote this, they were watching me. Not just recently, for a while. I brought the book down after that. I kept it on the coffee table. I didn't hide it. I wanted to see it, to keep reminding myself it was real. Every time I passed it, I would flip to a random page and read something new. Some entries got more detailed. He stood in the living room for 11 minutes and 20 seconds without moving. She no longer enters the guest room. This may indicate memory returning. He dreams about the hallway, always the hallway. That last one wasn't about me. I don't have a guest room. I don't dream about the hallway. So that meant someone else had been here before. Someone else had walked this floor and been watched. Maybe more than one person. The idea didn't make me feel better. It made the silence feel heavier. I called Kayla again the next night. I told her about the book. She didn't laugh. She didn't even hesitate. She said, Do you want me to come get you? That surprised me. I expected her to talk me down, to reason with me. But she didn't. Her voice was serious. She sounded scared. I told her no. I said I needed to figure it out. I didn't want to leave and come back to find things even worse. That part was true, but what I didn't say was that I felt something now, a kind of pull, like the house had become a puzzle and I was starting to see the edges. I didn't want to walk away from that yet. I wanted to understand it, not solve it, just understand it. The humming returned 2 nights later. This time it was louder, not aggressive, but closer, clearer, like someone was walking just above the ceiling beams back and forth, letting the sound follow them. I didn't move. I stayed in bed and listened until I fell asleep. The next morning, there was another note. This one wasn't hidden. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, same handwriting, pencil on white paper. You slept through the rearrangement. That's good. I checked everything, every room. Nothing looked out of place. Nothing moved. I even took pictures to compare angles. I couldn't find a single thing different. But then I opened the fridge. It was full again. Different food this time. Things I didn't recognize. A jar of something that looked like gray jam. A tray of eggs, but they were blue. A plastic bag with small round vegetables I had never seen in my life. I shut the door. That was when I realized what had changed. The kitchen floor was clean, too clean. I never mop at night, and yet it was spotless, like someone had wiped it down carefully. No streaks, no footprints. Except for one. A single bare footprint. Right in the middle of the tile, facing away from the fridge. I didn't touch it. Instead, I opened the book and flipped to the newest page. There was a fresh entry. Company can mean many things. I sat with that sentence for a long time, because I was starting to believe it. This wasn't a break-in. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't even really about me. The house was doing something, or maybe letting something in, something that had been here longer than me, maybe longer than anyone. And it had decided that I was company now, whether I wanted to be or not. I started to feel like the house had moods. That probably sounds ridiculous. I know it does. But it was this subtle thing, this undercurrent I couldn't quite explain. Some mornings I would wake up and everything felt still, not peaceful, just flat. No sounds, no strange smells, no movement on the cameras, nothing. And then other days, there would be this charge in the air. Not cold, not warm, just heavy. Like walking into a room right after someone has left, and you can still feel their presence, even though it's empty. Those were the days something would be different. Not dramatic, not loud, just off. A drawer that opened half an inch, a shadow that didn't match the angle of the light. My own handwriting changed slightly in a sticky note I was sure I had written the night before. I started keeping notes of my own, not in the house book. I didn't trust that one. I used a separate notebook, one I carried with me when I left the house. I'd write down every change I noticed. When it happened, what was moved, whether the fridge was full again, whether I heard the humming. I looked for patterns. There weren't any. Nothing repeated. The events didn't match the days of the week, or the weather, or the time I went to bed. The only thing I noticed was that it seemed to happen more often when I was calm. That was the one consistent thing. If I had a good day, if I watched a movie and almost forgot to feel scared, something would shift overnight, like the house didn't want me too comfortable, like it needed to remind me it was paying attention. Kayla called again. She asked if I wanted to stay with her for a few days. I told her I couldn't. I didn't give a reason, just said I couldn't leave right now. That wasn't entirely true. I could have left, but I didn't want to. Not because I liked what was happening. I didn't. I was exhausted. My eyes were always red. My hands were shaking more often than not, but I had the sense that if I left without understanding this, something worse would happen. Not to me, to the house. Like it needed me to stay balanced or grounded, like I was part of the structure now. One night, I heard something different, not the usual humming. This was quieter, but more specific. It was a voice. I couldn't make out the words. They were just beneath the surface, like a conversation through a thick wall, but it wasn't a recording. It was too uneven, too real. I sat on the couch and listened for nearly an hour. The sound never moved. It came from above, the attic again. Eventually it faded. When I checked the hatch the next morning, it was closed tight. But the footprint on the kitchen floor was gone. No smudge, no dust, no sign it had ever been there. The fridge was empty again. That day, I read more of the house book. I flipped toward the end, past the entries about me and others, and found a page that was different from the rest. It was a list. Just names, first names only, dozens of them. None of them were mine. None of them were Kayla's. I didn't recognize a single one. Next to each name there was a small mark. Some had check marks, others had slashes. A few had little circles drawn next to them. No explanation for what the marks meant. At the bottom of the page was a final note, written in slightly darker pencil. Some stayed. Some tried to change the rhythm. Some left the door open too long. That line stuck with me all day. I kept reading it over and over again, trying to figure out what it meant to leave the door open too long. What door? Was it literal? Was it something else? That night, I sat in the hallway under the attic hatch. I brought the notebook, not the house book, mine. I turned on the recorder on my phone and let it run while I sat there. No questions, no prompts, just silence, a blank space in case something filled it. For the first hour, nothing happened. But then, softly, the humming started. Same rhythm, same tone. This time it felt closer than ever, like it was sitting right above me. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Then I heard a creak, one soft board shifting, and then my name. Not loud, not whispered, just spoken, calm, like a parent calling from the next room. I froze, my legs locked in place. My hands were gripping the notebook so hard the corners started to curl. It only said my name once, then silence again, then the humming returned. I stayed there until the sun came up. When I checked the attic that morning, the book had been moved. It was now sitting directly under the hatch right in the middle of the floor with a new page open. The entry was simple. He sat with us tonight. He heard. He stayed. That was it. No signature, no name, I still don't know who us refers to. I don't know if it means the house or the voice or whoever is leaving those notes, making the food, humming. But I do know this. I was not alone anymore. And maybe I never had been. Maybe the house had been waiting for someone to pay attention, someone to listen, someone to stop reacting, and just sit still long enough to hear what it had been trying to say. And I had done that. I had stayed. The next morning, I stayed in bed longer than usual. I didn't want to get up. Not because I was afraid exactly. I just didn't want to find anything new. I felt like I had crossed into a quiet agreement with the house, and if I kept the rhythm slow, maybe things would stop shifting so suddenly. But eventually, I got up. I walked through each room slowly. Nothing was out of place. No new items in the fridge. No pages added to the house book. The humming was gone. The air felt still, almost expectant, like something was waiting for me to react. I didn't. I made coffee. I sat in the same chair I always did. I opened my notebook and just started writing. Not about the changes, not about the attic. I wrote about old memories, places I had lived before, apartments where things never quite fit right. A dorm room in college, where the closet door never stayed closed, no matter how many times I pushed it shut. A short-term rental I stayed in for 3 months that always smelled like lavender, even though I never used anything scented. I don't know why I wrote those things down. It just felt important, like maybe I had missed the earlier signs, like the house had been echoing toward me for longer than I thought, and I had not heard it clearly until now. Around mid-afternoon, I checked the attic again. The book was still there, right under the hatch where I had left it. I stood on the ladder and read the last few entries again, just to be sure I hadn't imagined them. He sat with us tonight. He heard. He stayed. Still there, pencil slightly smudged from my fingers the night before. I finally picked the book up and brought it down. I don't know if that was the right move. I placed it on the coffee table again, flipped a few pages ahead and found something new, another list. This one shorter, only 4 names. My name was the last one on it. Next to each name was a date. The first 3 were old, one from 20 years ago, one from 8, one from just last year. Next to my name was a blank space. No date, no mark. I stared at that for a long time. I started thinking about the others again, the ones mentioned in earlier entries, the people who had lived in this house before me, or maybe stayed in it. I still don't know if those names were tenants, guests, or something else entirely. I did some digging that night, looked up the property history. The records were thin, just a few names listed over the past 50 years. Not unusual, but somehow that felt like part of the problem. Too neat, too quiet. I found one name that matched the list, a woman who had owned the house in the late 90s. No online presence, no obituary, nothing beyond a single line in a scanned deed transfer. The trail just stopped. The more I looked, the more I realized this house had gaps, holes where there should have been information, notes, paper trails, but there was nothing, just silence. Around midnight, the humming started again. This time it was slower, almost soft enough to mistake for a low fan or a faraway radio, but it was the same pitch, the same rhythm. I didn't sit in the hallway this time. I stayed on the couch. I opened the house book again and found a fresh entry already written, though I had not heard anyone moving. It just appeared. He is learning the shape of stillness. I didn't know what that meant, but I felt it. I had stopped reacting. I had stopped resisting. I had stopped treating the house like it was broken. And in return, the house had started speaking more clearly. That same night, something new appeared on the kitchen table. A folded piece of paper, thicker than the ones used for the other notes. This one was a different kind of paper, smooth, clean, like resume paper. Inside was a map. It was hand-drawn, a layout of my house, rooms labeled in pencil, not the way I label them, not bedroom or bathroom. They had other names. The room I slept in was labeled Chamber of Delay. The kitchen was called the Offering Place. The hallway was the Listening Path. The attic had no label. There was a small symbol drawn over the attic space, a circle with a line through it. At the bottom of the page, in the corner, was one sentence. Every rhythm ends in stillness. I placed the map next to the house book. That night I did not check the cameras. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would not show. The next morning I woke up feeling different, not well rested, not exactly calm but focused, like I had reached the edge of something and needed to make a choice. I opened the fridge. It was full again. This time the items were different, more familiar. Toasted bread slices wrapped in wax paper, a jar of peanut butter with my old brand from years ago, the one that had been discontinued, a small thermos of black coffee already warm to the touch. Everything was arranged neatly, with care. I sat down at the table and ate. It felt like an offering. Not to me, from me. Like the house had taken something I didn't realize I was willing to give and had made a space for it. I didn't question it. I just let the rhythm keep going. I didn't know what came next, not exactly. But I had already stayed longer than the others. And the house knew that. It had written me in. The day it stopped completely. No warning, no message, just silence. I woke up to the same room, same light coming through the blinds, same blanket half kicked off the bed, but I knew before I even stood up that something had changed. The air didn't feel pressed down anymore. The humming, which had always lingered like a hum in the pipes or a memory in my ears, was just gone. Not faded, gone, like it had never been there to begin with. The fridge was empty again. The book was gone. So was the map. I searched every room. I checked the attic. I moved boxes, reached into the insulation, tapped on every beam. Nothing, not even dust out of place, just a normal attic. Still, quiet, untouched. It wasn't just that the items were gone. The feeling had shifted. The rhythm I had been living with, the strange heartbeat of the house, had stopped. And I was still here. That was the strangest part. I had been half convinced this story would end with me disappearing, or going mad, or being absorbed into whatever force had been watching me. But instead, I was standing in my kitchen, fully awake, perfectly sane, and completely alone. I kept waiting for something to come back, a note, a voice, the creak of a board in the hallway. I even set the cameras up again, watched the feeds late at night, just in case something returned. But they stayed empty. I made my coffee, ate real food again, went outside for the first time in weeks without feeling like I was stepping away from something unfinished. I even slept through the night. No dreams, no shadows. At first, I thought maybe I had passed a test, that I had survived something, endured it long enough to be released. But the more I sat with that idea, the more wrong it felt. It hadn't been a test. It had been a process, and it was over. I still don't know what exactly it was, not in any concrete way, but I know what I saw, what I felt, what I experienced. I lived inside a pattern that reshaped my understanding of space, time, and presence. I was part of something, briefly, fully, quietly. And then it moved on. I checked the attic hatch one last time about a week later. There was a faint fingerprint on the underside. Just one, smudged, too small to be mine. I didn't clean it. I just let it be. I started going outside more, seeing friends again. I even stayed over at Kayla's place for a weekend. She didn't ask too many questions. She could tell something had lifted. At one point she turned to me and said, "You look clear." It was the right word, not happy, not relieved, just clear. I didn't explain the details to her, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't think it would translate. This wasn't a ghost story. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't about fear. It was about proximity to something I still don't have a name for. She let it be, and so did I. I kept the house. I thought about selling it. I even met with a realtor once. But walking through it again with someone else pointing at things and asking questions felt wrong. I realized I didn't want to leave it behind. Because the house had changed me. Or maybe just revealed something that was already there. I think about that a lot now. How much of us is built by what we live around, what we listen to, what we let in, and how quiet that process can be. I found a new notebook recently. It was sitting on the back steps when I got home from work, wrapped in brown paper, unlabeled. Inside were blank pages. Just that. No names. No notes. No maps. But the paper felt familiar. Same thickness, same slight texture, same faint pencil scent. I haven't written in it yet. It doesn't feel like mine to write in. Not yet. I leave it on the coffee table, the same place the old book used to sit, and every now and then I flip it open to a random page, still blank, always blank. But I check anyway, because I know how this works now. If something changes, it won't be loud. It will be subtle. A new smell in the hallway. A plate turned half an inch to the left. A name added at the edge of the page. I don't fear it anymore. Whatever lived here, or passed through here, or spoke through walls and silence and humming, it did not want to hurt me. It wanted to make space. And in return, I made space back. I live quietly now, more intentionally. I clean the floors more often. I open the blinds every morning, even if I don't feel like it. I make tea even if I don't drink it. Sometimes I leave the back door open for a few minutes longer than I need to. Not to invite something in, just in case someone is listening. Because I think maybe that's what the house needed all along. Someone to notice, to stay long enough to learn its rhythm, to live differently, as the note once said. I understand that now, and I think that's why it left. Because it didn't need to stay once it was understood. I don't expect it to return. But if it does, I'll be ready. Not to run, not to fight, just to listen, to sit still, and pay attention. I was in London for a short layover, just one night before my early morning flight. The hotel was old, a bit creaky but centrally located and convenient for my schedule. I didn't expect anything more than a place to crash for a few hours, maybe grab a quick breakfast before heading to the airport. I was assigned room 306 on the 3rd floor. It was nothing special, just a small room with a single bed, a window overlooking a quiet street, and the usual hotel furniture that had seen better days. I checked in late, around 10 p.m., feeling the exhaustion from traveling hit me like a wave. I dropped my bags, flicked on the light, and collapsed onto the bed. The air was a bit stuffy, and the floorboards creaked under my feet, but I shrugged it off as typical of older buildings. I pulled the curtains closed and set my alarm for early the next morning. I wasn't expecting much to happen. I was tired, my body still adjusting to the time difference, and ready to sleep. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of the door creaking. It was soft at first, like a gentle groan, but unmistakably the sound of the door moving. I sat up, heart beating faster, and called out a quiet hello, hoping to hear a reply or at least some noise from the hallway. But there was nothing. The silence felt thick and heavy. I got out of bed slowly, walking over to the door to check the peephole. I wasn't sure what I expected to see, but when I looked through, I froze. There was a girl standing just inside the room, wearing a white dress. Her form was blurred, like looking through frosted glass or caught in a soft focus. She didn't move or speak. It was as if she was watching me, waiting, but not really there. I blinked and looked again, but she was still there, faint and pale. My mind raced. Was I dreaming? Was it a hallucination from jet lag? I backed away from the door, trying to shake off the feeling creeping over me. Then I knocked gently on the door, hoping for some response. Maybe a noise or a sign of someone else in the room. But again, there was nothing. No answer, no movement except that faint, blurred figure still standing quietly. Suddenly, the door handle began to turn slowly. I could hear the lock clicking undone. My heart leapt into my throat. I bolted across the room, grabbing my bag as I moved. I threw open the window and jumped onto the fire escape, shaking as I made my way down to the street. The night air was cold and sharp, and I tried to steady my breathing as I looked back up at the room. The next morning, I spoke with the hotel staff, my voice still shaky as I explained what happened. They looked concerned but also a bit wary, as if they had heard stories before. One of them told me that room 306 was not currently rented out and that the hotel had no plans to rent it anytime soon. The room had been closed off for repairs, or so they said, and they couldn't explain how I had been assigned to it. I checked the room key in my hand. It was genuine, clearly marked with the number 306. The staff seemed puzzled, but assured me they would look into it. I left the hotel early, feeling unsettled and half convinced that what I had seen might have been a trick of my tired mind. But the blurred figure in white stayed with me long after I left the city, a haunting image that refused to fade. Was it a hallucination from exhaustion and stress, a real person hiding in the room? Or was it something more, the infamous lost bride said to haunt that part of the hotel? I don't have answers, only the memory of a cold night, a creaking door, and a girl in white standing just inside the door of room 306. The morning light felt harsh after the unsettling night I'd spent in room 306. I barely slept, tossing and turning with the image of the girl in white etched into my mind. I wasn't sure if it was fear, exhaustion, or something else entirely, but that blurred figure kept playing on repeat, as vivid as if she had been standing right in front of me. The hotel staff were polite but evasive when I asked for more information about the room. They insisted it wasn't being rented and had been closed off for maintenance. That didn't explain why I had the key or why the door had opened itself. I left the hotel early, eager to escape the shadow hanging over me, but the feeling of something unfinished lingered. I couldn't shake the sensation that the room held secrets that someone, or something, was still clinging to. The city bustled around me, bright and noisy, but I felt detached, like I was carrying a weight that didn't belong to this world. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I decided to look into the hotel's history. I found a small library nearby and spent hours going through old newspapers and records. The hotel was almost a century old, with a rich but complicated past. It had seen its share of guests, celebrations, and tragedies. The more I read, the more I realized that the stories of room 306 were woven into the fabric of the building itself. One tale caught my attention, the story of a bride who had stayed in the hotel decades ago, right before her wedding. The papers described her as beautiful but troubled, caught in a whirlwind of secrets and fears about her future. On the night before her wedding, she had vanished without a trace. The police searched for weeks but never found her. Over time, rumors grew about a ghostly figure in a white dress haunting the hotel halls, especially near room 306. It was easy to dismiss these stories as folklore or hotel gossip, but after my experience, I wasn't so sure. The descriptions matched the girl I'd seen, pale, in white, silent, and watching. The idea of a lost bride trapped between worlds was chilling, but it also felt oddly fitting. It explained the presence I had sensed and the inexplicable unlocking of the door. I reached out to a few locals who had lived in the area for years, hoping for more details or personal accounts. An older woman told me about the bride's family, how they had been devastated by her disappearance. She mentioned that the bride was said to have been afraid of her fiancé and uncertain about the marriage, which made her vanish without explanation even more mysterious. According to local lore, the bride's spirit returned to the hotel every so often, wandering the halls in search of peace or escape. The more I learned, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that the hotel, and specifically room 306, was haunted by this tragic figure. I wondered if my own encounter had been a glimpse into that sorrow, a moment when the veil between past and present thinned enough for me to see. Back at my own place, the memory of the hotel stayed with me. I found myself replaying the night in my mind, analyzing every sound and shadow. Was it really a ghost, or was my mind playing tricks after a long journey and little sleep? The uncertainty was both terrifying and compelling. I decided to reach out to a friend who had some experience with paranormal investigation. She listened carefully as I described the encounter, the footsteps, the door creaking, and the girl in white. She suggested that I might have experienced a residual haunting, a replay of a past event imprinted on the room, like a video stuck on loop. That would explain the repetitive nature of the phenomena and the lack of interaction when I tried to communicate. She also mentioned the possibility of a residual emotional energy, that sometimes powerful emotions like fear, sadness, or longing can linger in a place long after the person who felt them has gone. It made sense, especially considering the bride's story and her apparent fear and sorrow. The thought gave me a strange comfort. Maybe I hadn't been alone in that room. Maybe the presence was a fragment of a life interrupted, a whisper of a story seeking to be heard. It didn't make the experience less unnerving, but it added depth and meaning. My friend encouraged me to return to the hotel, armed with recording equipment and an open mind. She wanted to help me capture evidence and perhaps communicate with the presence if it was willing. Part of me was hesitant. I wasn't sure if I wanted to face whatever was waiting in room 306 again, but I also felt drawn back, compelled to uncover the truth. I contacted the hotel manager, who was surprisingly cooperative despite the sensitive nature of the room's reputation. After some discussion, I arranged to spend another night there, this time with the company and tools to document the experience. As the date approached, my nerves grew. I wasn't sure what to expect. Would the girl in white appear again? Would the door creak and unlock by itself? Or would it be a quiet night with nothing but the hum of an old building? The uncertainty was almost worse than the fear. When I arrived, the hotel felt different, older somehow, heavier with history and memory. I was led to room 306 with a key in hand, a sense of déjà vu washing over me. The door looked the same, worn and faded, the number plate slightly tarnished. I stepped inside, the air cool and still. My friend set up recording devices and cameras, and we settled in, waiting for midnight. The hours crawled by slowly, filled with soft whispers, distant traffic, and the occasional creak of the old structure. I tried to keep my mind calm, focusing on breathing and grounding myself in the moment. As the clock struck 12, the door creaked open slowly. I turned toward it, heart pounding. There she was, the blurred figure in white, standing just inside, watching silently. The room seemed to grow colder, the atmosphere thick with emotion. I spoke softly, greeting her, telling her I meant no harm. The footsteps began the steady pattern, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, echoing through the room. Then, that faint giggle, light and wistful, floated through the air. It felt like a conversation, a connection bridging the gap between now and then. The night stretched on, filled with moments of silence and presence. We listened, watched, and honored the story woven into the walls of room 306. And in that space, I found a strange peace, a shared understanding with the girl in white who had waited so long to be seen. The night in room 306 with my friend felt surreal, as if time had softened and the edges of reality blurred. After the door creaked open and the figure in white appeared, everything shifted, air thickened, the temperature dropped, and the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken stories. The footsteps began almost immediately, that familiar pattern of 3 steps forward and 1 back. They echoed softly but clearly, filling the room with a rhythm that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the past. We sat quietly, cameras and recorders capturing every sound and movement, but the real connection was something beyond technology. I felt a presence beside me, not threatening but deeply sorrowful, like a spirit weighed down by memories it could not release. The faint giggle floated through the air again, light and distant, like a fragile thread of joy woven into a tapestry of grief. My friend whispered comforting words, her voice gentle and calm, as she encouraged the spirit to share whatever it wished. For a while, the room remained still, except for the footsteps, but then a subtle shift happened. The figure seemed to move closer to the center of the room, the outline becoming a bit clearer, still blurred, but more defined. I could almost make out a face, pale and wistful, eyes filled with longing and sadness. The experience felt like standing at the edge of 2 worlds, caught between the living and the past. I wondered what thoughts and emotions lingered here, what fears, what hopes, what regrets. The story of the lost bride came alive in that moment, no longer just a tale from old newspapers, but a living, breathing presence reaching out. We spent hours in the room, alternating between silence and gentle conversation, hoping to provide comfort and understanding. The spirit seemed to respond in its own way, footsteps changing tempo, a soft breath, the barely audible giggle lingering like a tender farewell. As dawn approached, the atmosphere lightened, the heaviness lifting as if a burden had been eased. After we packed up, I felt a mix of relief and gratitude. I had witnessed something extraordinary, an encounter that defied explanation yet touched the heart. The room was no longer just a place of mystery, but a space where a story had been honored, where a spirit had found a moment of peace. In the days that followed, I listened to the recordings and reviewed the footage. The sounds of footsteps, creaking doors, and faint laughter were unmistakable, captured in ways that words alone could not convey. Sharing these with others was difficult. I knew many would be skeptical, but for me the experience was deeply real and transformative. I returned to the hotel a few more times, each visit bringing new moments of connection and insight. The girl in white remained elusive yet present, a guardian of stories and memories woven into the fabric of the building. Sometimes the footsteps were accompanied by the soft rustle of fabric or the scent of lavender, small signs that made the presence tangible and intimate. The hotel staff began to share more stories, some of which they had kept to themselves out of respect or fear. Tales of strange noises, unexplained occurrences, and guests feeling watched or comforted in room 306 became part of the hotel's lore. The lost bride was no longer just a legend, but a living memory embraced by those who cared. For me, the experience was a journey into the unknown, a lesson in empathy and the power of stories to transcend time. The encounter with the girl in white challenged my understanding of reality and opened my heart to the mysteries that dwell in quiet places. I left London with a sense of closure, but also a lingering wonder. The hotel and room 306 remain standing as a testament to love, loss, and the unseen threads that connect us all. And somewhere, in the shadows and light, the footsteps and laughter continue echoes of a story that will never truly end. The weeks after my initial encounter in room 306 were a whirlwind of emotions and reflection. The hotel, once just a place to rest between flights, had become a touchstone for a deeper understanding of presence and memory. I kept returning to the recordings, listening closely to the footsteps, the creaks, and that faint giggle. Each playback felt like a conversation with the past, an invitation to bear witness to a story that had long been hidden. The hotel staff, once guarded about the room, grew more open as I shared my experiences. Some admitted to feeling uneasy around room 306, sensing something that could not be explained. Others recalled fleeting glimpses of a pale figure or the soft echo of footsteps when the hallways were empty. The lost bride had become more than legend. She was part of the hotel's living history, respected and remembered. I spent hours researching similar stories, learning how places could hold on to emotional energy and how those energies could manifest in ways that touched the living. Residual hauntings, imprints of past events replaying like echoes, made sense of what I had experienced. The idea that a powerful emotional moment of bride's fear and longing could be imprinted on a room was both haunting and beautiful. I also reached out to others who had experienced similar phenomena in old hotels and historic buildings. Their stories echoed mine encounters with unexplained sounds, fleeting figures, and sensations of being watched or comforted. It was a community of seekers and witnesses, each bringing their own pieces to the puzzle of the unseen world. Back home, I found myself changed by the experience. The world seemed more mysterious, layered with stories just beneath the surface. I was more attuned to the quiet moments, the creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a shadow, the subtle shift in the air. I realized that life is full of unseen connections, threads that weave us into the past and future in ways we rarely notice. The memory of the girl in white stayed with me, a symbol of vulnerability and resilience. Her story was one of love interrupted, fear unspoken, and a longing to be understood. It reminded me of the power of stories to live on, to reach across time and touch hearts in unexpected ways. The hotel itself felt different now, a place where history and present met in a delicate dance. The staff continued to honor the memory of room 306's lost bride, maintaining the room with care and respect. Visitors sometimes asked about the room, intrigued by its reputation. The hotel embraced its haunted history, not as a curse, but as a unique part of its identity. On my last visit, I stood in the hallway outside room 306, the door closed but alive with memory. I whispered a quiet goodbye, thanking the girl in white for the lessons and the connection. The air felt warm, the presence gentle, as if acknowledging my words and releasing me from the mystery. Walking away from the hotel, I felt a sense of peace and completion. The footsteps and giggle had become part of a larger story, one of human experience, memory, and the enduring bonds that transcend time. I carried that story with me, grateful for the encounter that had opened my eyes and heart. Life went on, but the hotel and its lost bride remained a chapter in my journey, a reminder that the unseen can be profound, that stories shape our world in ways we often overlook. And somewhere in London, in an old hotel on a quiet street, the footsteps in room 306 still echo softly, a timeless rhythm of love, loss, and remembrance. After my last visit to the hotel, I found myself reflecting more and more on the entire experience, how a simple layover had led me into a story that felt larger than life. It wasn't just about a haunted room or a ghostly figure anymore. It was about the way stories live on, sometimes in the most unexpected places, and how they shape the spaces we inhabit. The girl in white, the lost bride, became a symbol for those moments in life when hope and fear collide, when decisions hang in the balance and the future feels uncertain. Back home, I kept my journal close, filling pages with thoughts, memories, and fragments of conversations. Writing helped me process everything: the shock, the fear, the awe, and the strange comfort I felt from the presence in that room. It was like carrying a secret, a story I was entrusted with, and I wanted to honor it with honesty and care. I shared some of my experiences with close friends, knowing many would be skeptical. But the reactions were mixed. Some were fascinated, others a little uneasy, and a few confessed they had their own stories of unexplained moments and ghostly encounters. Those conversations reminded me that the unseen touches all of us in some way, whether we acknowledge it or not. The idea of residual energy stuck with me. It was comforting to think that intense emotions, moments of great significance, could leave traces that linger like echoes. In a world that often feels fast and disposable, these echoes are anchors, reminders that our lives and feelings matter in ways we cannot always see. The Lost Bride story made me think about the people behind the legends. She wasn't just a ghost story or a spooky tale told to entertain. She was a person who lived, loved, and lost a human being whose fears and hopes still ripple through time. That made the haunting less frightening and more poignant. I found myself looking at other places I visited with a new perspective. Old buildings, historic sites, even quiet corners of cities suddenly seemed full of stories waiting to be uncovered. I realized that the past isn't gone, it's woven into the present, like a shadow or a whisper, shaping the world in subtle ways. The hotel itself stayed in my thoughts often. I hoped the staff continued to care for room 306 with the respect it deserved. From what I gathered, they did. The Lost Bride had become part of the hotel's identity, a story shared with guests, not as a warning, but as a piece of living history. It was a reminder that some places are more than just bricks and mortar. They are vessels of memory. I also thought about the nature of presence, how sometimes what we think of as ghosts might simply be echoes of life, moments captured in time that seek acknowledgement. The footsteps and giggle were not just noises, they were a language, a way for the past to touch the present, understanding that changed everything. There was also a lesson in humility. The experience showed me that there are mysteries we may never fully solve, that some questions remain open-ended. Instead of fearing the unknown, I learned to embrace it as part of the rich tapestry of existence. The unknown is where wonder lives. Sometimes late at night I would hear a soft creak in my own home or catch a glimpse of shadow moving just out of sight. I no longer felt afraid but curious and respectful. I imagined these were small reminders that the world holds layers beyond our immediate perception, layers filled with stories, emotions, and spirits waiting to be understood. The encounter in room 306 also deepened my appreciation for empathy. To truly honor the lost bride's memory was to acknowledge her fear, her hope, and her longing. It was a call to listen to others, to history, and to the subtle voices that often go unheard. In sharing my story, I hope to encourage others to approach such experiences with kindness and openness. Whether a ghost, a memory, or something else, every presence deserves respect. Every story deserves to be told. As time passed, the intensity of the memory softened, but the impact remained. The hotel, the lost bride, and the footsteps above my bed became part of my personal narrative, a chapter that shaped my understanding of life's mysteries and the power of human connection across time. Now, when I think of London, I don't just see the bustling streets or the landmarks. I see the quiet room with the creaking door, the blurred figure in white, and the footsteps that echoed like a heartbeat. It is a reminder that every place holds stories waiting to be discovered, and that sometimes those stories reach out in the most unexpected ways. The girl in room 306 may have been lost, but in her haunting, she found a voice that crossed decades and touched a stranger's life. And through that voice, her story lives on, a timeless reminder of love, loss, and the unseen threads that connect us all. After months of reflection and research, the story of the girl in room 306 finally settled into a quiet place inside me. The hotel, the lost bride, the footsteps, and the giggle, all of it became less of a mystery and more of a powerful reminder of the ways stories live on beyond their telling. It was a tale of a life interrupted, a presence lingering not out of malice or unrest, but out of hope and memory, and knowing that brought a strange kind of peace. The last time I stood outside the hotel, the street was quiet and the air cool with early evening fog rolling in from the Thames. The building looked much the same as it had when I first arrived, but now it carried a different weight for me. It was a place of history and humanity, a keeper of countless stories like the one I had been fortunate, or perhaps cursed, to witness. I took a deep breath and looked up at the window of room 306. For a moment, I imagined the girl in white standing there, watching the city lights flicker below. I whispered a farewell and a thank you for sharing a piece of her story with me, for trusting me to carry it forward. The hotel staff had told me they continued to care for that room with reverence, leaving it unoccupied as a silent tribute. They knew the story, respected the presence, and understood that some histories are best honored with quiet respect rather than ignored or dismissed. As I walked away from the hotel that night, I felt the weight of the encounter lift gently from my shoulders. The footsteps and the giggle had become part of a larger narrative, a reminder that even in loss there is connection, that memory is a living thing, and that love endures beyond time and space. Back in my own life, the experience changed the way I saw the world. I found myself more open to the stories whispered by old buildings, by quiet streets, and by the silences between people. I realized that every place, every moment, carries with it layers of meaning waiting to be discovered. The girl in room 306 was no longer a ghost story to me, but a symbol of resilience and hope. Her presence taught me about the power of acknowledgement, the importance of listening, and the delicate threads that link past and present. Sometimes, late at night, when the world grows still and shadows deepen, I think of that room and the footsteps that echoed softly above the bed. I smile, knowing that some stories never truly end. They live on in the hearts of those who remember and in the spaces where memory lingers. The hotel stands quietly on its London street, a monument to the lives it has touched and the stories it holds. Room 306 remains closed, a place of rest for a lost bride, and a reminder to all who pass through that the past is never truly gone. This is where the story ends, not with fear or unanswered questions, but with understanding and peace. A tale of a girl, a room, and the enduring power of memory and love. And so the footsteps fade into silence. The giggle becomes a whisper, and the girl in white finds her rest.